All right, welcome to a post-Christmas Boxing Day live stream with Flat Earth Math, Charles. Um, Hi, how's it going?
Howdy, howdy. It's going great. Things are crazy with kids.
Yeah,
Oops, I forgot to turn off my.
what do you got? What do you got?
Okay, that much better. I forgot to turn on my mute on the watch page. Yeah, things are great with kids. Things are crazy. So you're going to hear a lot of stomping around upstairs. My 4-year-old just stomps around the house, but as 4-year-olds do. But no,
Cool. Did you guys
things are
have
great.
a good Christmas?
Very good Christmas. Um, we got a million Beanie Babies. The A friend of ours from church, she had this collection, and they're in mint condition. So it's like if we wanted to just you know turn around on eBay, we would get thousands of dollars for these things. There's like the Princess Di Memorial Bear. A lot of these things are from the 90s. And like I said, in mint condition. But her point is, she sees our kids in the pew. She sits behind us, and she's like, I want to give these to you because, like, her children are all grown and everything. Um, uh, so she gave them to us, and gave it to our kids, and our kids are like, they're not collectibles. They're children's playthings, and
They're
our
toys,
children
as they
love.
were meant to be.
Exactly. So yeah. How about you? Have a good
Yeah,
Christmas.
we had a nice. It was nice just to be away from school for everybody and be off work for a couple of days. It's just good. Um, and we've sat around the house, got a whole bunch of puzzles for Christmas, new puzzles and stuff. So we've been doing puzzles and so forth. Something we like to do around here.
I love. Yeah, I was raised on jigsaw puzzles, and so I love tackling a nice 1,000 piece puzzle. Where it just takes you a week or so. The only trouble is you have to have like a space, so it can't be disturbed. But um, back when I was a kid, my mom used to buy. I mean, I'm one of four children, and so my mom used to buy these big meat trays. I've never seen these things since I was a kid, but basically, if they would just put like a whole lot of meat on this tray and shrink wrap it, whether it's chicken thighs or whatever. And so my mom would buy meat like by the bulk, and so she'd get these trays, and each tray would be like easily like 18 inches long, maybe even 24 inches long, and a good width. And so she would save these trays, so she would literally wash them after they're and not throw them away. And then those became puzzle piece layout. I don't know what they were. Basically, you lay the pieces out. Like we've never done puzzles where all the pieces are just sitting in the box and you're just reaching into the box and pulling out. No, we like to lay out our pieces, and so we'd have these trays and we'd lay out all the pieces. Like that's how I was raised. But it was a lot of fun.
We have to devote a coffee table to it,
Right.
but it's a rough sacrifice to give up that coffee table. Otherwise, it's just holding clutter.
Presumably, you don't have cats or dogs.
No, we don't have cats or dogs. My wife's allergic to cats, and my daughter's allergic to dogs. So we have a
Right.
hamster.
Okay.
We have a hamster. The hamster is behind me, behind the green screen there. So if she wakes
Behind
up
the
and starts
Statue of
running
Liberty.
on the wheel, we'll hear the hamster maybe later.
Okay. So you said your daughter's allergic to hamsters or
No,
allergic to
she's
dogs?
allergic to dogs. So
Okay.
we can't have a dog. We can't have a cat.
Okay. If you don't mind my asking, how old is your kid?
She's 12. No,
Oh,
I'm
okay.
sorry. I'm sorry. She turned 13 last week, so she's 13.
Well, happy birthday. She's now officially a teenager, and your
Officially a
life,
teenager.
as you know it, is now over.
Yeah, she didn't turn into a teenager, in that way overnight. So yeah, we're still holding out for
Right.
maybe
Well,
another year.
the thing that is fraught with danger is the mother daughter relationship. So you know the Punnett square. So it's like you've got mother father son daughter in the Matrix. I think the one relationship out of those four that has the most potential for danger is the mother daughter. But no,
It
kids
can
are
be
kids are
volatile.
fantastic.
It can be truly volatile. Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Blessings to you and your family. My oldest they're going to be, are they 9? Yeah, they're going to be turning 10 in a week. So the
Oh.
twins, the twin boys.
Twin
Yeah.
boys. Oh boy, that's going to be fun as teenagers.
So here's a puzzle for you. Not a puzzle, but like, you're a biology and science guy. And
Okay.
like before I had kids, I had this weird notion that children are offspring of their parents. And and then my wife and I had kids, and I were like, no, no, they are not your own. And so like my wife and I joke to each other, we've got 4 kids, and we say, we don't know, like, where do babies come from? Like, we don't know where babies come from, because they certainly didn't come from us. I'll tell you that. So my twins,
You don't see yourself? You don't see your wife in them?
physical features, sure. But like my one son looks like my baby pictures, kind of, sort of. And of course, passersby, that they think all 4 of our kids look identical, and I don't think they look anything alike at all. But so certain physical things. But when the twins were in utero, their personalities were already formed. so,
Right.
when,
I would concur with that. In the old nature versus nurture discussion, I think, from what I've read over the years, kind of goes back and forth and back and forth. I think we're sort of centering on something like 50-50, but you're clearly born with some predispositions
yeah.
that will differentiate you. And obviously it's because of the constellations in the sky at the time of your birth.
Yeah. Well, actually,
Clearly.
my mother used to read palms. You'd find this fascinating. My mom, if because we're having an open discussion here. So,
Yeah.
but and we do have a couple people in the chat. We have Daniel and Tiny Captain. So hello, folks in the chat. My mom took my oldest sister, and she's now 60. But like when she was a little girl, they went to a fair.
Oh no, we lost him. I think we lost him.
And the palm
Oh,
reader, was like dressed up like a gypsy. And did you lose me?
yeah, we lost you for a
Okay.
bit. You're back.
And so,
Bandwidth
okay,
is pretty low though.
all right. Oh, okay. Um, can you tell if it's on my end or your end, or just, I don't know.
Well, my
There is an
understanding of
indicator.
StreamYard is that you broadcast to it and I broadcast to it.
Oh, right,
So
right,
if you're
right.
choppy,
Okay.
it's got to be you, I think.
All right. That's what my wife would say. She usually always blames things on me. Anyway, I think there might be a setting for me to go low bandwidth or something. But what was I saying? So my oldest sister, when she was a little girl, went to a fortune teller at a fair, and had a horrible experience because the lady said you're going to live a short life, and like my sister was in tears, and my mom was mad as a hornet, understandably. And so what she did is instead of getting mad, she got even. And so she got all the books she could on palmistry, and she became a master at reading palms. And I'm telling you, you're not going to believe me, but then she turned around, and then she would only read the positive. Like when she was doing her study, she literally would skip any material that said negative material. She just would skip that chapter or that paragraph. So she only learned the positive. And she turned around and she would read palms at our fairs. Like my elementary school would have, like, a school fair where, it's a fundraiser for the school or whatever. And so she would dress up like a gypsy. She would put a diamond on her forehead. And my mom was like she was, a product of the 1940s and 1950s, but she was a 60s hippie chick at heart. And so she got all the scarves and whatever. She like totally looked like the gypsy. She had the eyeliner, and she would read palms. And the thing is, she got so good at it that people would, I don't know, they would be very, very impressed with their reading. And it's like, I'm a science guy, and like, but I don't know.
Do you ever
Always
see
impressive.
the James Randi
Yeah.
bit on that
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
where
there was
he
one with the envelopes, and everyone gets the same envelope, and yeah.
yeah, well, he did one. I maybe someone will know it and can link it for us or something. But there was one I watched where he had a professional like palm reader, or at least I don't know if it was a professional or a hobbyist, but he had a palm reader who was absolutely convinced that his stuff was good. And then he basically did a double blind with the palm reader guy. And what he asked the palm reader, no, it wasn't a double blind. He asked the palm reader guy to read the exact opposite. Tell the person the exact opposite of what he read in the palm and see what their reaction was. And he got the same reaction. It didn't matter.
Okay.
The veracity of what you say has nothing to do with it.
Right.
You know.
But it is interesting. I mean, I there was one that's done with a college class, where the everyone turns in. I guess it's like a psychology class, but everyone is supposed to write down a little slip, their birth date, and just a couple little things, and then they process them, and then they come back the next week, and everyone's given an envelope addressed to them. And then so everyone opens their envelope at the same time, and people say, all right, raise your hand if you think this accurately describes you. And people are like raising their hand, and everyone's all excited. And then he says, now trade your thing with the person next to you, and everybody in the room had the same reading. And so it pissed a lot of people off, because they were, they'd been hoodwinked, and people don't like getting hoodwinked, especially in terms of belief, areas of belief. So
yeah, if I remember right, there was at least one student in the classroom when they were filming that was really upset that apparently, I mean, it had really been offensive to him that his beliefs had been challenged or something. I'm not sure exactly why, but it was clear that he was angry.
Yeah, well, but it wasn't just that his beliefs had been challenged; it's that they were lied to. I mean, like almost all of psychology is about lying to people for the purpose of some experiment.
Every psychological test ever performed in history involves starting with lying.
People don't like being lied to, and especially if you're going to be lied to by your professor. You're sitting on this course, and your professor says something to you, and then it's like, yes, it's all for, a good cause of like learning a lesson, but ultimately, you're lied to, and so. But we're talking about. I was on a live stream. What was it called? Try Thinking. Have you ever heard of Try Thinking? It's a sort of a flat Earth channel.
Try Thinking.
Yeah, that one? Bev Try Thinking.
Yeah. I haven't watched a lot of his stuff, but I've watched a little.
Yeah, it goes on for 3 hours each time, and in fact, there's a session going on right now. But it's it's kind of like the old school where just people are having the dorm room 2 a.m. conversation.
Right.
But where everybody in the dorm room believes, the Earth is flat. What was I saying? So we're talking about lying to children with regards to the Santa Claus, and
that's an interesting topic when you segue into the stuff we talk about.
Right. So my wife and I, we didn't really talk about this before we had kids, but my wife and I. We never really promoted Santa Claus. Like, we never said, Santa Claus is going to come down the chimney. Well, we don't have a chimney for starters. But, Santa Claus is going to bring you... Like, we never, promoted that. But, I did put out presents under the tree, and I did sign them Santa. And the kids were, they were excited about Christmas, but they weren't, 100% vested in the Santa Claus myth. Mm-hmm. And of course, you watch the TV shows and the movies, and so it's all part of pop culture.
Inescapable.
And they sat on Santa's lap when they were little babies, taking the photo in the mall. But we weren't and I think some parents they might be really dishonest. If the kid says, "Mom, do you and Dad put the presents under the tree instead of Santa?" And then if the parent doubles down, "No, it's Santa Claus." Well, now you're lying. You just got a direct question. Now you're lying. So I don't really, But as a mythical creature, as a fairy tale, it's fun to kind of celebrate fairy tales and when kids are little, and then kids grow up, and it's not like this betrayal. You betrayed me, you lied to me my whole life, and I don't know. What are your thoughts?
What are my thoughts? You know, I don't remember how hard we pushed it, but I'd say it's inescapable in modern culture. So yeah, my daughter was a big believer for a long time, um, but yeah, eventually you start to wise up. I mean, it's normal. Either you figure it out just from your own critical thinking skills start to develop, um, or you know your peers. A lot of times I think you go to school, you know, and you're interacting with other kids who are 10, 11, 12, and they're starting to share their doubts and put it together.
Right.
um, yeah, we ultimately take the position of, you know, when she asks, we tell her the truth, you know, and try to celebrate the the reasons behind it. You know, that's what it is to give someone a gift and not try to take credit for it. As that's, you know, that's our spin on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Um,
we want kids to be good, you know, so like the whole he knows when you were sleeping, he knows when you're awake, you know. You want kids to be good, but ultimately, you know, it's about celebrating, you know. And I don't know how you are religiously. I kind of tend to believe that you are not a religious man, but you know, my family we're Christians, so
I'll say, since I already mentioned Santa Claus and all that, we celebrate Christmas. Let's
right.
say that. I
Yeah.
don't want to
Yeah. No. That's fine.
I don't want to say too much about it, because one of my main pillars is that religion and science are orthogonal. That
Meaning
these
at right
two,
angles to each other.
yes,
Okay.
like if you could draw an XY axis and you could put science anywhere on the X axis and you could put religion anywhere on the Y axis, they don't cancel each other in any way.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
that
That's
if
very helpful. Right.
Yeah, and I think actually the violation of that orthogonality is really a big contributor. It's a problem in science communication, and it has been for decades. People get the idea that if you're pro science, you must be anti religion.
Mm-hmm.
And because there are many communicators that are both pro science and anti religion, that have been throughout, you know, the decades. But that's not right, and I think it's a very bad message to be giving.
I think the modern, well, sort of. All right, I'm going to say Bill Nye, and I'm going to say Neil deGrasse Tyson, but because those are like the public face of sort of pop science, if you want to
Mm-hmm.
call it
Mm-hmm.
that. And there seems to be this thing where it's like it's sort of cool to be atheist. You know, it's kind of cool to kind of make fun of believers, you know, and then you point fingers at believers and you're like, you know, ha ha ha, I know the truth. There's no God, and you're the backwards one, and you believe the earth is 4,000 years old. And it's like, wait a minute, I never said anything about the age of the earth, you know? I believe in God. I never said about the age of the, so it's like all these assumptions built in, but like we're so cool and above it all. And like that sort of is this promotion where people kind of get the impression that religion and science are on opposite ends of a line, you know, of a what do you call it? Of one axis.
Yeah,
There's one axis.
you
Religion on one
visualize
side.
it like a spectrum
Right,
when you
right,
hear these people talk. Some of them,
right.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, I've heard him say some things that can definitely be interpreted that way. I don't think I've heard Bill Nye really take it that way,
Yeah,
although
okay.
he did the debate with that Young Earth dude. Was it
Yeah.
Ken Ham?
I
Or was
don't
it the
know.
other one?
Those young Earth
Kent Hovind.
creationists are
Hovind and Ham. I get the two
yeah,
guys confused.
yeah. Those guys are nuts. My my church takes an interesting stand in that it doesn't take a stance on any science topic, and therefore there is no there's no contradiction. But I was hearing, you know, because like of course, you know, we believe in the Bible. The Bible is sort of a central pillar of, you know, of scripture. But you know, everyone knows that there's parables. You know, there are parables in the Bible. There's metaphorical lessons, and so, you know, the idea like, oh, you take the Bible literally, and there's the story of Jesus talking about somebody with a beam in there, and it's like, did you think there was somebody walking around with a 2x4 sticking out of their eye socket? And it's like, no, it was a parable. So it's like, Noah and the flood,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
the creation story.
was the Jonah in the Jonah story? There's a talking animal. Is it a donkey or a camel or something? Do you remember?
No,
I don't
I am not a
remember.
Bible scholar. I'm a fairly
I'm
new.
definitely not either. But if when you read that, I mean, I think a normal, even a school kid understands it's not literal, right? We're not saying that the donkey is literally talking. Oh, in those days, the animals talk. Did you know? It's in the Bible. No, I don't think that you weren't supposed to read it that way.
Right.
I think it's obvious that we weren't supposed to read it that way. But some people do. Yeah.
And Debate Night says they teach science and evolution in Christian schools.
Yeah, I'll put that up.
Yeah. So there really is. I think there's a lot of Christians out there, like the fact that young Earth creationists exist, that they serve as a proxy for Christians in general, and then so a lot of atheists, super scientific atheists, they're just like, they point at Christians and are like, ha ha ha. I mean, and some of it's like really, like, it's actually disrespectful. So for example, when you live your life, you should not live your life like just in mockery of other people. Like, just like, that shouldn't be how you wake up and get out of bed. But yet, the sign of the Christian faith for many people is that very distinctive fish that's made with two curves. And so people make a version of that with little feet, and it says evolution. And it's like, that only exists to mock Christians. And I was like,
I'm not sure that I would take it that way.
Okay.
I've seen the fish you're talking about,
Right.
and I really like the little fish. See, I think everyone sees everything through their own lenses, right? And so when you see the fish with the feet, you see mockery. But could it not also be embracing? Could it not be also saying, I'm a Christian who believes in religion? I'm sorry, I'm a Christian who believes in evolution.
Huh.
Could that not also be what that means?
I've never took it that way, but you are 100% correct. I don't see a Christian. I mean, it's almost like taking a cross and like doing something with it. Like, it's like it's a symbol, and it's not that the fish is a sacred symbol. I mean, it's it comes from a famous story in the Bible, but I can't see. You are correct, but I can't see a Christian doing that to quote unquote his own symbol.
We should ask owners of those symbols what they were thinking when they put it on their car. If there's anybody in the chat who happens to own one of those, let us know what you think when you put it on your car. I think when I first saw it the first time, I thought it was mockery. I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
I appreciated it. I thought it was amusing.
When I first saw it, I was an atheist. When I was an atheist when I first saw it, and so I thought I agreed with you. I thought, oh, ha ha ha, that's it's a bit of mockery, and but then when I became a Christian, I kind of looked at it differently.
Okay, so on mockery, then, is it okay to punch up? Right, it's always wrong to punch down.
Right.
So like, I think you and I will agree, making fun of flat earthers is sort of punching down.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing as the atheists are very much the minority, at least in this country, and the Christians are very much the majority in this country, is it okay for them to punch up?
Well, that's I mean, well, it's always okay. I mean, like, I believe I'm a freedom of speech guy, but yeah, I mean, the thing is, yeah, that's actually is very quickly becoming more atheist by the minute. So I wouldn't.
The trend is going that way,
like,
but
for example,
last I checked, it was still the strong majority Christian. If you collect all the denominations, right?
Like, there's globe Earth and there's flat Earth, where it's like one is 100% right and the other one is 0% right. Whereas like the atheist versus Christian, it's not like one is above the other. Like in terms of numbers, yes, okay, there may be more people who believe in God than disbelieve in God, but I wouldn't put them on a hierarchy in terms of punching up versus punching down. Does that make
Well,
sense?
I meant literally in terms of numbers.
Yeah.
That's usually punching up, punching down. Does not mean, or at least my understanding of it, doesn't mean I'm better than you, and therefore I cannot punch down. It means I'm in the majority position. So
Hmm.
it's like white people do not make fun of black people. That's punching down, and that's
Hmm.
socially unacceptable. But if black people want to make a comedy show where they make fun of white people, we'll all sit around and laugh because that's punching up.
Yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
it,
All right. Yeah, I hadn't really
it's a
thought about
minority
that
majority
phrase. Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. I always took it, and like I've never researched the concept of punching up, or at least like the
Hmm.
etymology and usage or whatever. But my impression has always been with punching up and punching down, it was like positions of power. You know. Um,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Actually, that's literally what it is. It's a position of power.
Yeah.
And so I just naturally equate majority with power.
Right.
Maybe that's not necessarily correct.
But like we live in a secular society, like at least here in the United States, we live in a secular society. So
Somewhat.
it's almost like
Technically, legally, right?
it's almost like the atheists have the upper hand. So
Okay. Well,
anyway.
that brings me to uh, political relativism, right? I think everybody sees themselves as the center, because you are the center of the universe. And so there, you look to the left, you see people on the left. You look to the right, you see people on the right. You see yourself
Hmm.
more center than you really are. You feel like you have less power than you do when you're privileged. And for example, saying that somehow the atheists have the power in this country.
Well, I'm
That's
saying that the,
that's
the the Christians
just
don't have power
objectively
because it's
crazy.
it's it's literally against the law for for the separation of church and state in terms of the law.
Okay,
You know.
let me challenge you
So
with just a couple of
okay, please.
statistics. How many atheist presidents have there been in this country?
Oh, I have no idea, but that would be an anecdote that has nothing to do with power.
Well, who's the most powerful person in this country?
Oh, I am, of course.
Well, isn't it normally
I mean,
said
in
that the
terms of the
president,
executive, the
the
president is in
president is
charge of the
like,
executive, but you could
and he's
definitely argue
elected
about
by
the
the
current.
people,
But
and
but but the thing is, you could say same thing about
how many
Catholics.
atheist senators, how many
We,
atheist congressmen in the
yeah,
federal level?
yeah, no, but I think those are 100% of those statistics are anecdotes, that are not germane to the conversation about actual
Really,
power, where it's like it's
the
it's
people
it's
who have
built
the
into our
power,
system. What'd you
the,
say?
the people who have the power, the statistics of those people are not relevant. So, like if I said
That-
44 out of 45 of our presidents were white men, that in no way indicates that white men have the power in this country.
That's true. That is correct.
That in no way indicates that.
That's correct. It's a
Really?
cultural.
Okay, you have a very
A cultural.
interesting
It's a cultural
idea
anecdote.
of
Absolutely a cultural anecdote. But
not
but
an
if you
indicator, though.
if you think that white men have the power in this country, so you haven't been
You
paying
don't.
attention.
You don't think so?
No. So
Who
here's a
does?
great quote. Here's a great
Who does? Dare I ask?
what here's a great I forget who said this, but I mean sort of it's a meme. If you ever wonder who controls you, just ask who you're not allowed to criticize. And I think that's a very powerful food for thought, we'll say. Food for thought. And so it's like you can identify in our culture, there are certain groups that they are off limits in terms of,
So the mentally
whether it's
disabled.
poking fun and,
So
comedians
by
or
that
whatever.
logic, we're controlled by the mentally disabled.
No, because I think
Can
that
you criticize the mentally disabled?
oh, sure, sure.
Okay.
but there are other groups where it's like you can get fired. You can lose your livelihood for saying the wrong thing about the wrong groups.
You could criticize your boss and get fired. Is that what you mean?
No, I mean an actual group of individuals in this country.
So if you criticize the mentally disabled, you don't think someone at your institution would speak to you about it?
Oh, sure, but you're not going to get canceled. You're not going to get,
Aren't you?
They're not as protected as, say, other groups.
Okay, there must be a group you don't want to name, so let's probably don't want to go there.
Let me just come out and say, well, all right, so we don't have to take this conversation in this direction, but like, let's say the trans community.
Okay, you're telling me that if you were to criticize the trans community in some way, that you'd get canceled?
Well, if I had a platform and I was speaking out, I mean, just look at what's happened to J.K. Rowling. Like, they're attempting to cancel her big time, and unfortunately, she's pushing back.
How successful has that been?
I'm sorry?
And that's been super successful, has it?
No, because she has FU money, right? But
right. So in other words, that power, it's not there. There is no power. The evident power that you're trying to demonstrate, you're coming up short.
The reason why I brought up that phrase is as food for thought. It's not a literal truth. If you ever ask who rules you, ask who you can't rules. I'm not saying that trans people are ruling this country. Okay. I'm just saying it's just something to think about. Like when they're, like, for example, when and I'm going to be really, really careful about not naming what I'm actually talking about. But 18 months ago, or before 18 months ago, a certain thing happened. And the name of that thing involved the name of the city in origin. And that was very quickly quashed. It's like first time in scientific history where the point of origin, the city of origin of a thing, which I'm not, I just don't want to be very careful.
I know what you're talking about. And yeah, there's
can't name it.
Long-term friend of mine, I don't speak to anymore. Over that very issue.
Okay.
And because I'll just say one of my other friends, and three of us were having this conversation, and my other friend said, look, that's not the official name that you're using. You're using an incorrect name for something. There is an official name. I'd like you to use the real name, please. I consider that other name you're using racist. And it happens to be my race that you are denigrating, and I don't appreciate it, so please stop. And the other guy just refused to stop. So I'm done with him at that point. Like, you can have every point out there of, there was some kind of canceling dynamic or something. But when someone tells you, hey, that's offensive to me, and I'm your friend, and you still refuse to bend, for your friend, then no, you're not a good person. So
yeah,
I'm done.
Well, that's unfortunate because built into that little bit of interplay was a falsehood, and that using the initial name for the event, we'll call it, there was no racism in that whatsoever. There was 100% no racism built into the initial name of the event.
Let's rephrase. You saw none.
Well,
but my other friend,
for example, but like
to him, yeah, it was racist.
But that aspect was promoted. That aspect, that calling it by the initial name, like everyone was calling it, CNN, MSNBC, NBC, all major news networks were calling it by this name, until there was a message sent out by a certain country saying you will not use this name. That name is racist. And then everybody stopped using that name. And then anybody who continued using that name, therefore you're racist. There was no racism built into it. And the thing,
that's
and we don't have to belabor that point.
That's not,
we can talk about something that we're allowed to talk about.
That once someone is offended the long history behind the offensive term is really no longer relevant.
Yeah.
I could explain to you. I mean, like I remember, in history class in high school, having certain words that we would have said that were not offensive, and we talk about the history of where these things come from, that today we don't say anymore because they're not considered, culturally acceptable.
Yeah.
And the history behind them doesn't change the fact that it's no longer culturally acceptable. So when your friend says to you, please do not say that to me, I would like you to say this other thing, that now it's on you to decide what you want to do. Do I deliberately wish to be offensive to my friend, or do I wish to acquiesce to his request? And if you choose to say, no, the history of it is my reasoning, but I'm going to offend you now, that's the choice you took.
What would you think about the concept or the proposal that people are more thin-skinned now than they used to be, say, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
I see no evidence of that.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
People have always acted that way. Things change over time, and generally things become more and more acceptable over time, in terms of different points of view or whatever. Different. Don't even know how to say it. People become more progressive, I suppose, as you progress.
I hate that word.
I know you do. I don't what. Yeah, because you are a conservative. We discussed that before.
Right, but I don't think you understand.
What's the opposite of
what
conservative?
it means to be a conservative. But
no, it's to resist
nope.
changes.
Nope.
Okay, what do you think conservative is? Define conservative.
Conserve liberty. If I give me two words, conserve liberty. But like if you wanted to give me 25 words, rights of the individual versus the group, rule of law, promoting or not promoting government dependence, so promoting independence. But the only word that to conserve would be to conserve liberty.
Okay.
And so, like in the modern conservative movement, I would say in the United States would be conserve constitutional liberty, because the Constitution was supposed to protect against, government overreach.
Okay.
And so, limited government would be a conservative principle, I would think. Traditional values, I would think, would be a,
Okay. Wait. You took a left turn there.
Why?
Where did traditional values relate to liberty? How does that in any way related?
Oh, no, I didn't say it was related. I was just saying it's under the umbrella of conservatism. Okay, I'm just giving you a bunch of things, rule of law. You could say, well, that's you're infringing upon my right to steal from people, so. But
yeah, exactly. You're infringing on my right to dump my sewage down your driveway. How dare you?
Yes, how dare I? So, I don't know if you've heard of, you've followed Milton Friedman, but he talked about the public good.
I know
so
Friedman.
he was more of a libertarian.
I don't know him personally.
Yeah. But may he rest in peace.
Yeah.
But but no, go ahead. No, this is your show.
I was just going to say, let's change the topic a bit.
Please.
One thing I wanted to discuss with you, because we do come from different political points of view a little bit. You describe me as your polar opposite. I don't think I am. I admit everyone sees themselves as center, but I think I can provide some evidence that I'm essentially the average American.
So you see yourself in the center.
I do see myself
I'm
very
the one
much
on
in the
this
center.
fringe.
And I think that you would be right of center.
Yes. Hard right.
I think I'm more left, perhaps, of center than I'm making out to be, but I'm certainly not, whatever those guys up in Seattle were doing a couple of years ago, where they're like basically, I don't know what they were doing, trying to,
Oh, like the Chad thing.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
whatever that was. It was absolutely insane. Um, okay, so that's where I'm coming from. Since we do have different points of view, and we've kind of butted heads sometimes on some politically charged issues, I wonder, since what we share is, this love of true science and objective truths, can we come up with a method or a metric for how to seek out objective truth that we could agree to?
Um, yeah, the answer is yes, but I think the big political divide between groups of people, and also maybe between you and me possibly, is where you see the role of government. In my life, like for example, I'm a school teacher. 99% of school teachers probably share your politics. They do not share mine. Okay, so I'm surrounded by, very kind, dedicated people serving the youth of Philadelphia, wonderful people who happen to probably pull the other lever in the voting booth, right? And so it's like, well, these people, they're clearly not evil. They're not those evil liberals, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, so my question is like, why do they do that? And I think, and this is my personal, correct me if I'm wrong, is the view of the role of government. If you see the government as something that, as a tool that can help the poor, then, or create social programs to help groups of people, then I could see that you might be politically on the opposite side of me, because I see the government as not being the
What
best,
is the role?
the best
Could you
vehicle.
summarize what is the role of government in your point of view?
It's complicated, but I would basically say almost all of those conservative principles I just listed, specifically rule of law and protecting the rights of the individual. Not so much the traditional values. I don't think the government should have anything to do with that. It should be hands off. I mean, like, I oppose the government even having, like, giving breaks to like homeowners. I'm like, I used to be a renter and now I'm a homeowner, and it's like, well, the government sides with homeowners in terms of tax breaks, and it's like the government should be in the business of saying we think home ownership is better than renting, and therefore we're going to pick winners and losers.
It's weird that the government subsidizes home ownership, but that's literally what we do.
Right.
So I completely agree with you
Yeah.
on that.
So,
And I think I agree with everything you just said. Actually, no, I don't see the government different than you do, but I think I draw the line in a different place.
okay.
I would say I recognize that that there are, let's say, unintended consequences of every action that you take. For example, polluting. Right? I could manufacture something. I could build a factory, manufacture something, and I have some byproduct waste. What do I do with it? I don't need it. I'm just going to dump it. Right? That's cool. Right? It's all good until someone has to go and deal with the dump.
Right.
And if me as an individual, I am not beholden to do that, and there is no government or social group who enforces that I take care of it, why would I?
Right.
I would, right? I would as an individual because I'm a good person, but a corporation is not a good person. A corporation has no moral backing to it. And so once you have a company, it's going to run roughshod. And I don't think we should release the government from any responsibility of trying to assist with that end.
Which is why I'm not arguing for anarchy, right? So, because you used the word "any" in that last sentence, and it's like,
Right.
okay, so some reasonable regulation, common sense regulations, but when you have like big, quote unquote, big government, when things get out of hand, like for example, some recent last 20 years, I'll say. there was clean water legislation that literally said that if you walked out into a field and there was a rainstorm and there was a puddle, and you picked up a bucket and you scooped up the rainwater, if you emptied that bucket, you just broke the law. The way the law was, the way the legislation was written, and it's like,
Yes.
that's a bit of an overreach. And then there was
But
other
it was,
ones.
but I think we can agree. We can
Right.
absolutely agree, as long as you don't start painting a cartoon out of it.
Sure, but
That-
sometimes it is
Let's say,
cartoonish.
let me ask you this.
Sure.
How many people were prosecuted under that law?
I don't know, but I know a lot of people, their livelihoods were affected, because it was talking about what people could do with their own private land.
Was anyone, does any of those people who complained, can you tell me specifically one that was...
I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but I do know for a fact that there were like farmers that had to change they had to irrigate differently or whatever. And it's like what they were doing before was not pollution, No,
but you're talking about the rainwater capture controversy, right?
I'm not sure if there's a name for what I'm talking about, but I just remember that it was like take a bucket and then fill it and then empty it, and then you just broke the law.
Right, but you realize that's not what the law is for.
Oh, of course, but if you could
the
write a
law
law
was for those, it was to stop those farmers from doing what they were doing.
Well,
that's what it was for.
Okay, but what was it that the farmers were doing that was,
creating dams?
Oh, well, damming water, but couldn't you write something that says you can't build a dam versus, somebody lifting a bucket of water and emptying it is caught under that umbrella? Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, do you see how someone has spun something you agree with into something that you think is ridiculous?
Well, yeah, but the thing is, if you want to craft legislation that prohibits farmers from building dams, then you could do just that.
Well, that's what they did. That is what they did.
Well, I think we're talking about two different things then. Because if you have legislation that says farmers can't build dams, and then Joe Schmo walks out and fills a bucket of water and empties it, and is technically breaking the law, then that's a really poorly written law. If you're going to capture, if you're going to snag this person doing this innocuous bucket emptying routine.
So you propose that we fix the law?
Well,
or you propose that we strike the law? Which is it?
Well, it would be a lot easier to strike the law and then craft it from the ground up.
No. Because you strike the law and then nothing will happen, and then you'll just have no law. So what we have, let me just make sure we're clear. What we have is a law that could be exploited by the government to punish somebody for catching a bucket of water, but has never been exploited in that way.
I would argue, yeah.
Has never. If you can cite me a single case,
sure, but
then
I don't think
believe you. But until then, you're just making stuff up.
Yeah, well,
right?
I don't think we're talking about the same thing. Whatever that law was that was enacted to stop farmers from building dams, I don't think that was the thing that I was talking about. I was talking about something up in Vermont from like literally 30 years ago.
It's called
and I don't know what the
rainwater
legislation
capture,
was.
And in many states, rainwater capture is technically illegal.
Yeah.
But if I put a bucket in my downspout at my house and catch rainwater, that technically that might be illegal.
Yeah.
But everybody has them. Nobody prosecutes them because that's not what the law is for. The law is there so that if I build a dam on my property and I'm diverting water that would normally run into my neighbor's property, so that my neighbor's farm now gets no water. I get all the water.
Right.
So I could be prosecuted.
Right. Okay. So I agree with you about the second part, but if you say with a very casual air, everybody does it and it's everybody knows it's illegal, but that's not the purpose of the law. See, that's where I have a huge disagreement with sort of the way government is done, in that what if a new regime came in, from the Purple Party? I just made that up. The Purple Party, and their big thing is, we're gonna prosecute people with rain barrels. And it's like, now you've got something where you've done it for years. Technically, you've been breaking the law, and they're going to say, we're going to go back and we're going to see how many years you've been violating this, and that's where your prison sentence is going to start. So it's like, like, so now it's not about the law, it's now about the regime or the people. And one of my big things about government is, if you swap out the purple party for the orange party, I just made those up, like, your life should not fundamentally change, because we shouldn't be ruled by, we should be ruled by laws and not by men, is a nice way of saying that. Does that make sense?
No, I agree. I agree completely. And I think the law is probably, if what we have described is true, then the law needs to be fixed. It is poorly crafted, obviously, and I think we can agree to that.
Right.
I just wanted to point out, to stress that you're doing something that you hate, which is cartoon language. You're talking about somebody catching a bucket of water and then going to jail or something over it, which is not true and has never happened.
Right. But my point wasn't that. Okay, and I hope you get this. My point was not that somebody was prosecuted for emptying a bucket of water. My point is that something is fundamentally wrong with a system that has the letter of the law saying that is an illegal act. It's like, I believe that we should protect the environment. I believe that we should be better stewards of the environment, 100%. But if you craft a law where the end result is you've just made it illegal to empty a bucket of water that you just got it from a puddle, then something is wrong with the way you just wrote that law. That was my point. Not that somebody was prosecuted.
Yes.
Right?
Well, and I completely agree. I'm going to completely agree that a law that said that is poorly crafted. And we do have lots. We have, in this country, we have lots of poorly crafted laws.
Have you ever heard of the book called 3 Felonies a Day?
I don't know. Maybe.
I haven't read it.
Alligators?
No. I mean, literally, the title of the book is called 3 Felonies a Day. And I haven't read it, but I've read, like, the synopsis or whatever, people have talked about it. And it basically is talking about how the average citizen commits 3 felonies a day. So, like, maybe your rain bucket, and, like, I don't know if you have a rain bucket in your house. Maybe you're a felon, you just haven't been convicted, And so it's like, that there's something broken with a system where the average person just going about their daily life is actually committing 3 federal felonies. That I think government is there's something wrong with that.
Okay, I agree. There's something wrong with that for sure. I was hoping, though, that we could talk about the stuff that isn't just opinion or law or whatever. The stuff that's factual that we differ on.
Such as men competing in women's sports. We don't have to talk about that. We don't have to talk about that. But
I don't know. I'm nervous about that one too, because I think I agree with you more than you think I probably do on that. I think it's a sticky situation that I'm not really qualified to mess with. And I think that comes to what I've done about that is to say, I'm not an expert in that area. But there are experts in that area. So I say, let's all shut up and listen to what the experts have to say. We should seek out experts who understand about physiological development and physiological differences. And we should hear experts on the sports and the histories of the sports. We should hear that. And we should let those folks hammer it out in the ways that is best for their athletic, departments to choose. And those of us who have no skin in this game and have no real training or expertise should really just defer to them. What do you think about that?
I disagree 100%.
Okay,
there's a great little phrase. It's a joke. It's a meme phrase, and it goes like this: "Shut up," she explained. So this whole thing about being quiet unless you're an expert, I think is really the antithesis of why we have the First Amendment. And Daniel Laster said something about Awaken with JP. Yes, 100%. I'm with Awaken with JP on YouTube.
I'm not sure what that is.
He's a funny. He makes fun of. Well, he used to make fun of like New Age stuff, but now he makes fun of things, of shifts in the culture where men can compete in women's sports. So he talks about stuff like that. But he's a very funny. He's a satirical, like, fake guru. I mean, his channel is about making people laugh, but now he's been, tackling some of those issues. So my dad had a really great phrase, because you talked about experts. Did you remember?
Yes, say it again for the crowd.
For every expert, there is an equal and opposite expert.
An excellent phrase, something I wanted to talk to you about.
Okay.
Because in my opinion, bullshit. That's complete bullshit. If we're each allowed to call one expert witness to the stand, yes, we will both be able to find an expert witness for whatever we want them to say.
Right.
No matter what you want them to say. However, that isn't how the real world works. The real world has, let's say you called somebody who is an expert that comes out and says the sky is green. I'm sure you could find someone who you could pay enough to come on the stand and say the sky is green.
Right.
I, however, would go to boards of people, entire panels, entire industries that would refute you. And it would be pretty clear that you had a crackpot on the stage. So having one expert who's willing to testify whatever way you want really should not carry equal weight to
but I think you're
consensus weight, right?
I think you're missing the point of my dad's. It is a funny thing to say. It was he would say it in jest, but you could take a look at any court case. We could even talk about something as serious as murder. And it's like, There is a prosecution attorney, a professional, went through law school, years of experience. And we have a defense attorney, went through law school, passed the bar, years of experience. And so you've got these two, of course they're going to call their own witnesses. But so I think the point my dad was trying to make is that oftentimes people will cite an expert. They'll say, we should do this because this expert said so. And then like the joke that my dad had was like, well, for every expert, there's an equal and opposite expert. So it's like, I think it was more a matter of like, if someone's just citing a source, it is possible that there is an opposite source. I mean, like the sky is green is kind of absurd. Obviously global flat earth may be absurd to some people, but people are taking things where, it's the right of the individual to compete in sport. And it's like, okay, so I kind of agree with that sentiment, the right of the individual to compete in sport. And it's like, as long as it is not unfair, as long as it's not inherently unfair. And so if you have and I don't know if you're aware of this, but because I did a deep dive on this a couple of years ago, there's the governing body of, say, K through 12 sports. I live in Pennsylvania, so I think it's like PIAA, with the P stands for Pennsylvania, but it's like, I don't know if it's USIAA or something, but basically it's the governing body of, that governs like high school sports, middle school sports. If you want to compete in leagues and tournaments, going to schools, competing with other schools, they handle the refs, they handle the rules. Their official position, and you may be surprised by this, their official position is if an athlete simply says the phrase, I identify as this other gender, then they can compete with full rights and privileges in that sport as that gender. No hormones, no drugs, no surgery, no anything. They just have to say the phrase. And you've seen the headlines. There have been some people who, like last season, they competed as a boy. Now they're competing as a girl, and they're demolishing the competition. And
I've heard of that. I'm not really aware. I'm gonna say I'll remain skeptical.
Yeah.
That the cases are not extremely rare, but I wouldn't say you're lying at all. I don't know.
Well, they're
I
becoming
say
less
it's
rare.
complicated.
You know, the
It's
cases are
very
becoming less
complicated.
rare.
And I don't think that blanket policy is what I would have chosen. I think I would have looked for something more nuanced than that.
Right.
But I
Something with more common
sympathize.
sense in it.
But I sympathize with them. Well, no, I don't think you can just slough it off and just say, oh, it's just common sense that I can make a blanket statement of some kind about how this should be done, because I think there are really complex issues behind this whole thing, and I sympathize with them in that they don't want to go there. They just don't even want to be part of this conversation. They don't want to have to be the ones to deal with it. And so they've just said, look, if you're willing to stand up and say, no, I'm a girl now, then they're like, okay, fine, dude, you're a girl now. Okay. Right. That's what they're doing, I think, at this point. Is that what I would have done? Probably not. I mean, as long as we're here, let's go for it, I guess.
Okay.
Like Bruce Jenner, right? Bruce Jenner was an Olympic gold medalist.
You just dead named him, by the way.
What's that?
Teasing. You just dead named him. I'm teasing.
I'm sorry.
I'm teasing.
Well,
I'm totally teasing.
Maybe I don't know.
No, please continue. I am totally teasing. Go ahead.
On
Bruce Jenner. Yes.
On the books, right? I watched it when I was a kid. Bruce Jenner was a gold medalist. What if 4 years later, Caitlyn Jenner?
Yes.
Caitlyn Jenner wants to compete as a woman. That doesn't seem appropriate to me. Right. But that's, on the other hand, I have a friend who's got a transgender child, and this is a preteen child. So the gender differences are less, and there's hormone intervention before puberty. That person will grow up as the alternate gender, and they want to compete in their chosen sport. Now, that's a very different animal than someone who grows to adulthood, or at least
through puberty,
well into their teens, and then suddenly chooses to change.
Right. Yeah, puberty is a big.
I will
milestone.
also say that for the vast majority of the sports, perhaps all sports, going from female to male confers no obvious advantage, whereas going the opposite direction does. So maybe there's an opening there to just create an open category. When I was in sports, we had various age categories, and then there's an open category.
Or co-ed.
Just this is the co-ed category, and so just do that, and so there's your get out of jail free card. I think there's an option there.
But
it's nuanced.
The thing is, all sport, well, not necessarily all sport. If there were restrictions like girls couldn't compete in sport, and I'm sure we went through that period of time where girls were physically not allowed. Like I think the first Boston Marathon, there was a woman who tried to run it, and she got physically tackled off of the course. Because women were not allowed to run in the Boston Marathon, and she was tackled to the ground. So so it's like, yes, there has been a history where there has been an issue, but like then sports became open, and then it became clear that for fairness, they really, like, women couldn't fairly compete with men on, like, especially physical things where it wasn't necessarily a baseball team. It was like wrestler versus wrestler, or even a, runner versus runner, weightlifter versus weightlifter. Women couldn't compete with men. So the entire existence of girls in women's sports is a testament to our desire for fairness. And it's really disturbing to me that we seem to just have completely forgotten that there is a reason why gendered sports exists. It's like, why does it exist? It is to be fair to women and girls, period.
Right.
And so this stuff is like, it seems to be upside down It seems to be really upside down.
But I wonder how much of the cartoon portrayal of reality is affecting your perception of what's really happening out there. How many? I have not looked into it. So if I were to take this up as my champion cause, before I do, I want to find out how many of these cases are there.
Right.
What is the backstory of their cases? What is their medical history and so forth? And how many of, like we say, I've heard someone come out and say, the track and field, women's track and field in this state has been won by transgender athletes, the first, second, and third place for 5 years running, or something like that. Is that true? If that's true, or anywhere near that kind of thing is true, then this is a major issue that should be dealt with.
Right.
If we're talking about in one competition, once there was one winner who is trans, that's right on. That's not a problem now.
Right.
If the statistics are anything other than the number of winners is proportional to the number of competitors, then we might have a problem. But if it is proportional and we're just highlighting the outliers to try to portray something, then that's not a fair comparison.
Yeah, but I would hope that like, for example, if you're on the first, like, year one of some experiment, and you're like, well, the data's not in yet, like, you're on year one of the experiment, and you're like, well, the 5-year data is not in yet. Do you see? I am making a cartoon analogy, but I would hope that on year one of the experiment, something that is grossly unfair could be identified as grossly unfair, like, without waiting for the 5-year data. Do you see what I'm saying? Because you're right.
Yeah,
it's a new phenomenon.
I see what you're saying, but you're imagining something. This reminds me of you see the guy with full beard goes into the ladies' restroom and it starts videotaping in there and puts himself on YouTube. Says, I identify as a woman, so I can go into the ladies' restroom. No, you don't, and you need to be arrested for indecency because you do not identify as a woman. You're lying. You are being indecent.
But according to the rules of many establishments, all you have to do is say that phrase, and that's they have turned it into a cartoon in many regards.
I'm not sure that that's the case. I think you have to establish it a little bit more than just say, I'm a woman today, I'm going to be a man again tomorrow. I don't think that's
well, you can't say that second part out loud. You can only think that second part. But you could say I'm a woman today, and then you get the red carpet treatment. But, like, there was a recent swim. I mean, up in Connecticut, they've been having a really problem with the running. Like it's like the state championships, first and second. Like, how many trans quote unquote trans girls athletes are there in running in the state of Connecticut? And in the entire state of Connecticut, first and second place, these two trans girls. And it's like, if you've talked about the number of participants, if you were randomly to distribute the participants, if there was and maybe it's a coincidence, but these two individuals have been demolishing the competition.
If you have an actual data for that, as opposed to just some anecdote, then that should have some weight, and I would agree with it. I think that if what you're describing now is factually correct, that sounds like something that some action ought to be taken. It doesn't seem appropriate to me to deal with it in that way.
Yeah. So the thing is, something's got to give, because the way if nothing gives, it's it's going to be the death of women's sports, the women and girls sports.
Well, but obviously that's not going to happen, right?
Sure, but the question is, how many girls are going to get hurt? How many women and girls? Because, like, for example, this state championship, there are a bunch of colleges and universities, and that sports scholarships are huge. I mean, I was not a sports person, but every university probably in existence has sports scholarships, and they're, the recruiters, if they go to a state event, the recruiter's sitting there in the stand with his clipboard, they're only going to talk to the first or second place finisher. I mean, like, that's an analogy. It's like, I'm going to the Connecticut State Championship. I've got my list, and it's like, you know what? Whoever places number 1 or number 2, we're gonna offer them. And so and there are a lot of athletes, like, they know this. They know that that's their ticket to getting recruited, and it's becoming a genuine problem, and the problem will only become worse because the response to the problem has been, shut up, she explained. Athletes are being told not to talk about it.
I don't agree with that sentiment that you just made there. I think I'd like to get back to factual, objective.
Sure. Okay.
Stuff.
We can
because what we're talking about is not that. This is very much policy that we're talking about. Factual things. So
tell us why you think the Earth is concave. I'm interested in this.
Exactly. So why is the Earth concave? Well, flat Earth is actually quite easy. And I think we can agree that you can just test that yourself. And you do it in your backyard, any number of a dozen different ways, and it comes out round every time.
Right.
So done and dusted. But not everything is that easy. Let's say, I know one we kind of differ on is climate change. And I think we don't just differ on policy. I think we differ on facts, on basic facts. Is that fair?
Well, I would argue that that climate change, as it's been portrayed, it's portrayed as being a lot more catastrophic than it is. Like there's a signal to noise thing where it's like man-made impact on the climate. There's a lot of noise there. There could be a signal, but it's not, and of course maybe my criticism is with public media and not with necessarily scientists. But scientists know who writes their checks, and there've been some very public cases of people losing grants because they're like, wait a minute, this whole climate change thing, it's not as cut and dried as it may sound. And so it's like, I kind of disagree with some of these. And then they're like, well, you don't get the grant, and that's definitely happened. So I think, you and I probably agree, obviously science is science, but I am going to argue that a lot of the science has been actually corrupted.
Okay. So what I wanted to talk about then was how could we as reasonable, rational people come up with some set of objective metrics where we aren't just going out and cherry picking our favorite study,
right, and
choosing our favorite expert to say what we want to say? How do we find out what the truth really is?
Okay. Well, there's certain metrics, like, for example, hurricane severity, and you can plot it from like the last 100 years, numbers of hurricanes,
Okay, so backing up a little bit, we find an objective, a prediction, perhaps, find an objective prediction, and then find data to back that. So you're suggesting in this example, hurricane severity.
Yeah, well, and the only reason why I threw that out is because that's one of the arguments that, because of man-made climate change, hurricanes are more severe. Like, that's a claim that has been made. I'm not saying you're making that claim.
Okay.
So I'm saying that you could examine that claim.
I would agree with that. I would then want to know, what is the chart year by year, as far back as we can go, of the number of, say, Category 4 and above hurricanes?
Right.
Is that?
More data is better. So you can have total numbers of hurricanes. You could have them sorted by category, because it could be that because of man-made climate change, we're getting a whole lot more Category 3 hurricanes. Well, that would fly under the radar if you were restricting. Do you see what I'm saying? So, more data is better. But yeah, no, that sounds reasonable. If you were to only have one metric and you didn't want to be buried in data, yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Okay. Well, we shouldn't look for one metric then. You're saying we should look for more metrics?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, in terms of the hurricane thing, what if the effects were that there was a lot more frequent lower strength storms, and your metric was we're only counting category 4 and above. I'm just
Well,
throwing that out
you'd
there
want
as
to
a
make sure that the claim matched
right,
the metric.
right.
And my understanding
Okay.
of the claim is that that's not the case, that it's...
Well, there are several claims. One is that hurricanes are more frequent, and the other claim is that they're more severe. And so if you're going to examine the more
I've
frequent,
only heard
you'd
the
want,
more severe claim, but...
yeah, no, I mean, I've heard both. I mean, they usually put them together. Hurricanes are more frequent and more severe,
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
but that's a metric,
Okay. All right. So that's a metric. So we, as a method, we should look for predictions and then check the metrics against those.
Yeah. The thing is, if you make a prediction, then you have to wait, and the thing is the data is noisy, year over year. You may have twice as many hurricanes in 1 year and then half as many the next. So
yeah,
the prediction...
what would be statistically enough that you could say is a signal in the noise?
Well, what I would say is, and I mean, I'm a big fan of predictions, but you could actually take the data, like, up till today and just say, hey, do we see a pattern? Like, map it against CO2 emissions or whatever. Yeah, I think predictions are great, but it's like you can actually determine if there is a pattern today without necessarily waiting for the next 5 years of hurricanes to get your result.
Yeah, well, I think, at this point it's 2020, so the predictions are from, right, they started in the 80s, they improved in the 90s, they improved in the noughties, they improved. So we could take their old predictions and test those, certainly, right?
Right.
Okay. What about the experts? Is there a way to judge the quality of experts or the quality of the source? Like if I come up with a chart, I Googled over here what the thing you just mentioned there, and I see a smattering of different things. Some seem to support the claim, some seem to refute the claim. How do we judge which ones are valuable?
Yeah. Well, that's very hard because, and again, this is my claim, that science has been politicized. And that, and I don't want to make it sound like, there's a smoke-filled room where people are, saying, how can we modify the data? But, because I believe that probably most scientists believe that man-made global warming is a problem. And I think that part of that has been because of education and the media, et cetera. And then it's like, so if you have science itself, whether it's like, we're going to give you this grant, we're not going to give you this grant, it's really hard to find alternative viewpoints. Meaning like the movie Minority Report, where it's like you got the 3 judges and they're seeing the future, and then like the Minority Report is like, well, what's the judge who's saying, the other 2 people agree, and that's great, but it's like, we're really interested in what the minority says. Do you see what I'm saying? Like there's that
Yes.
aspect of, if you really want to tackle a situation and like 90% of people are in agreement, it's like, wouldn't it behoove you to like really kind of examine what the 10% are saying? Now, in the flat Earth debate, obviously the people are saying the Earth is flat, and it's like, all right, so we've examined that and we've determined that the Earth is not flat. But like in a case where it's like there's so much noise in the data, it's like, can you make a trend line, or is it the trend line, sloping upwards slightly in the middle of all this, up and down data? So it's like, I would hope that people would be interested in like, well, what's the opposition saying? I mean, almost like good debate prep. What's the opposition saying? And it seems to me that the opposition, like, they call it science denialism, and I really take umbrage with that term, because
That's
science,
a good segue.
Science is seen
as
what's commonly or currently the narrative is what's we're calling science.
So what I heard you say, let me summarize it.
Sure.
The scientists currently believe, the majority of them currently seem to believe, that man-made climate change is real and potentially dangerous. And You think there's a conspiracy at work that has driven that.
No, I'm not going to call it a conspiracy. I'm going to call it.
Is an organized group
No.
of grant givers who refuse to give grants to people who say it's not true.
Take the word organized, and I would agree with that.
A disorganized group.
No, well, take out the word group. I would say that if you were on a grant giving committee, you personally, if you were on a grant giving committee, you would be less likely to fund a grant to somebody who is clearly skeptical of man-made climate change.
Would you fund a grant if someone's saying the Earth is flat?
I'm sorry, what?
Would you fund a grant for someone saying the Earth is flat?
No.
Well,
but the shape of the Earth is genuinely settled because it's actually a matter of physical geometry, whereas man-made climate change,
rising temperature on the Earth is not.
Well,
let me see where you're at.
Okay.
Is the Earth warming?
I'd say very slightly, yes.
Okay. And is this the result, at least partially, of human activity?
Unknown. It is potentially,
yes. So you're at like stage 2.
But it's anthropogenic global warming is man-made driving the change in climate.
Okay. So the scientists, you agree that the vast majority of scientists say that this is clear, right?
Yeah, but I would also argue that the majority of scientists.
Let me make sure I got this
Sure.
right. As a non-expert, you say you're skeptical of the experts because you see bias in the system, you think.
So I just want to clarify the word expert. I'm not necessarily talking about climatologists.
No, I'm only talking about climatologists.
Well, then I don't know what percentage of climatologists say, but when they do like a general survey of science people, that's when I said a majority of scientists believe in man-made global warming. But that includes, biologists and, people who play with DNA all day.
Right. Let's only talk climate scientists. Then.
Right.
How about?
Right.
So, are you on board with the notion that the vast majority of climate scientists say that this is a man-made effect?
I don't know what the percentage is. I wouldn't say vast majority. I mean, like, for example, when the IPCC publishes its report, and they have all these climatologists contributing to it, then, and it happened, I forget, it was a couple of years ago, I forget, IPCC number 5 or IPCC number 4, where it was like there were climatologists were like, I want you to take my name off of this report because the summary that you're publishing in the front of the report does not accurately reflect what I actually said, in the body in the body of the report. And that's my whole point about being corrupting science is like there's this 300-page report and then there's the one-page abstract, and the one-page abstract is politicized.
Okay, so the IPCC is not trustworthy in your book.
Well, no, I'm just saying that you have to look at the whole picture. I mean, if you've heard of a scientist who is like so noteworthy that he was asked to be on this panel and he says, please take my name off the report because you're corrupting the results. Like I would hope that somebody would say, let's see what the truth of the situation is, as opposed to like, that guy's a crank, we won't invite him next year, which seems to be
how many scientists do you need before you think that there's enough weight of consensus here that no, he's just a crank, I'm not interested?
Well, but
or do you
but
listen
I would
to
argue
every
that science has
single
never ever been about consensus.
Yes, it has.
No,
it has always been about consensus.
No, it hasn't. Oh my goodness. Okay, so then that's a philosophical point of difference that you and
I
have.
I think it's Kuhn's, isn't it? Kuhn's talks about paradigms.
I'm not familiar with the name.
Paradigm. That's the wrong one. I'm going to get his name wrong. Paradigm shift. Thomas Kuhn. That's what I'm looking for. Thomas, let me type his name in here. Thomas Kuhn, who is kind of the new Karl Popper.
Okay.
The new influential voice in what is science and how does science work. He argues, that I'm going to try to summarize it. I agree with him, that the way science has always worked throughout history is people think things work in a certain way. Someone comes forward and says, no, you're all wrong. It works this other way. And everyone, the consensus at the time is, you're a crank. We're not listening to you. But there's a small minority who says, let's look into this. And they look into it. And then it takes about a generation before the new consensus becomes, that guy was right.
Like 30 years.
Yeah, about a generation, because old folks have trouble accepting new ideas. But when you're raised with this potential new idea, you just accept it, and it doesn't seem strange. That's my spin on why this happens. Famous all throughout science. That's how it has worked. But we don't always take everybody's crank idea, because for every one that turns out to be the new paradigm, there's 100, there's 1,000 that are completely wacky.
Right. They're genuine cranks.
Right.
Right.
So we have to wait for the paradigm shift before we, as people who are not experts, can truly look to the experts and say, that is settled now, right?
Right. Well, yeah, I hate that word settled, because it's like, settled means, consensus. I don't know. I mean, there's certain things that genuinely are settled. Like, for example, the shape of the Earth, once you send rockets into orbit, and it's like, no, the Earth could still be flat, and it's like, okay, no, that's just ridiculous. But oftentimes we're talking about, more areas of opinion. Like, for example, what causes cancer, what cures cancer, and then and what levels,
You're saying that's not settled? That's opinion?
Well, like, for example, there are a whole bunch of things that you could say increase one's likelihood of getting cancer,
Okay.
but then you could take it a step further and you could say, well, that causes cancer, and it's like, well, now you're kind of getting into a gray, an area of
fair enough.
So
yeah, it's not a scientific position to say that smoking causes cancer. The correct phrasing of that is to say smoking dramatically increases your likelihood of getting cancer.
Absolutely,
there's a strong correlation there.
Okay, but what I want to jump into is when I said I disagree with that science is about consensus, and then and you and I had that back and forth, and then you talked about how science is a certain way, or the establishment says a certain thing, and then there's some quote unquote crank or some minority voice that says no, it's this way, and then everyone jumps on them. Well, there's the consensus that is like quote unquote in the wrong, because they haven't developed either the technology, or they haven't researched what the guy's claims actually were, or maybe science isn't developed enough in terms of our investigative capabilities. And then ultimately, maybe 30 years later, this guy's ideas were taken as correct. So it's
right. Galileo was a crank.
But that seemed okay.
But hold on. We don't get to wait 30 years to find out who was a crank and who was not. We have decisions to make today. So when we make our decisions today, I think the obvious choice is to make the decision based on the best available evidence we have today. Do you disagree in any way?
So yes and no, but it's like, but what if the people who are saying, we need to make a decision today, well, like, what if all those people are the majority when the crank is the quote unquote crank, the outsider, the minority view, is saying his piece? And so you're like, well, no, we don't have 30 years to listen. We don't have 30 years to wait to listen to you. We're just going to go now. And it's like, well, what if the decisions that are being made are actually worse? Like, for example,
are you proposing that we not make a decision? Are you trying to claim that Rush was wrong? That Not choosing is not choosing not to choose.
Yeah, right. When you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
That's
Um,
right. You have,
yeah,
my
well,
friend.
but this gets back to like the role of government. You know, like when you jump in and you say, you know, government needs to protect the environment by
Let's
declaring
let's
CO2 to
make
be
it
a pollutant.
simpler.
You know,
Let's make it very simple. Um, you choose whether or not to brush your teeth at night.
right?
Are you a dentist? Are you trained in any way
No,
in like the use of fluoride or any of this? No, right? You're just taking the consensus view. You're rolling the dice. It could be someone's going to find out in 20 years that this fluoride toothpaste was causing mind control, right? But
the jury's not out on that one. It's still good.
the jury's still out, dude. No,
Right.
I see people all the time talking about that.
They're putting nanites in toothpaste.
Nanite toothpaste. That's right. It's nanite toothpaste. When you put the toothbrush in your mouth, you have made a decision. You have made a decision based on the available evidence. You saw the crank who said that it's nanites, and you disregarded him based on the weight of these other experts. And yet, when we say something about like climate change, you're saying, no, 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 those experts, not good enough for me. I need to wait because there's this crank who I trust.
Well, okay, let me put
So
it to you
there's
this
something
way.
at work there, and I think you need
Okay.
you need to look very carefully and identify what is at work with you that makes those two concepts different.
Okay, so you've just turned me into a cartoon, so I'm going to wag
I
my
have,
finger at
yes,
you.
I have.
Because what is the evidence for there being nanites in toothpaste? Zero. There's zero
No,
evidence.
if you give me a few minutes, I will dig up plenty of
No,
cranks who
no,
say
not
whatever you want me to
not a
have them say.
claim. Evidence. Okay, evidence that would be more than just some guy, you know, shouting in the street with a signboard around his shoulders. So my understanding is that there's zero evidence for nanites. There is a lot of argument over fluoride. People talk about fluoride, but I've never seen any credible claim.
Fluoride is poisonous. Let's do that.
Yeah.
We won't say nanite. Nanites was an obvious cartoon.
Okay.
Let's say fluoride is poison.
Right. And
Yes, I can support that.
I've never seen credible, like for example, I don't know if you ever heard about the story about how fluoride was discovered. Like there was this natural. I mean, fluoride is a natural occurring chemical. And do you know the story of fluoride and how it got to be?
I don't remember how it was discovered for
Okay, so
use,
and to your
but
viewers,
I would
please.
like to focus.
Okay,
on,
but the thing is, there's no evidence. The point is, there's no evidence. The evidence for fluoride being safe is 100 years long. Okay, but what I'm talking about with climate change.
So it's the number of years. So it's the number of years of evidence.
No, it's a combination of the weight of the evidence, the weight of the evidence, and then part of that weight is reliability, reducibility, or reproducibility. Have other scientists studied it? What's the data? What's the length of the history of the data? Okay,
do you evaluate this data yourself?
Well, I mean, in terms of climate change, I mean, there's so much stuff out there. I'm not a climatologist, but like in terms of toothpaste, it's like, you know.
Did you research this toothpaste thing?
Well, I actually did do a little bit of digging on fluoride just because I was curious as to what all the fuss was about. But like, no, most people, it's like they go with, you know, like you go to the grocery store and the grocery store is full of toothpaste, and of course your wife says, I won't kiss you unless you brush your teeth because you're nasty. And so it's like, you know, and of course we're raised to brush our teeth. We go to the dentist when we're kids, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not saying that's all brainwashing, but that is part of the popular culture. Is like, yes, you brush your teeth if you want to have healthy teeth, if you don't want to offend everybody around you, you brush your teeth, and then fluoride toothpaste is better. I'm not saying I've investigated all those claims all the years I was brushing my teeth, and I don't think anybody else does. But the point I'm trying to make about climate change is that the data that says that there's more noise than signal, like that data is not zero. Like
It's not zero with fluoride either.
the all right, so like for example, somebody comes down with cancer,
Or let's
and
do
it
something.
turns out
Let's do something closer analogous, like cigarettes and cancer.
okay,
That I think is where you're going, right? The correlation between cigarettes and cancer is pretty strong,
right,
but the tobacco company was famous for bringing out their alternate experts and bringing out their alternate studies, and playing up the signal to noise. Do you agree that cigarettes, to colloquially say it, cigarettes cause cancer, right? There's a strong correlation between smoking and cancer.
sure.
Okay, you accept that, but not the climate change.
Well, what about secondhand smoke? That's a and the reason why I bring this up is like my best friend mother is a diehard like she's 100 yards to the left of you, okay, but she was a statistician, and she was literally hired by tobacco companies to run the data on secondhand smoke, and she was kind of a bit of an outcast among her liberal friends because they're like, how could you take that dirty money and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I'm a statistician. I go where the data the points, like she took her job as a statistician very, very seriously. And she found that there was no connection, so like out in the popular culture, it was like secondhand smoke kills. And there was all these signs and the billboards and all this stuff. And it's like, the data was not, the data to say that secondhand smoke kills was anecdotal at best. But the actual factual conclusion that could be drawn was,
are you trying to make the connection that the secondhand smoke and climate change are related?
Well, what I'm trying to say is that there could be a lot of tempest in a teapot where if the data does not support it, like you can have everybody, the consensus you could say among normal people would be like, oh, secondhand smoke is really bad. It's like, but if you actually look at the data doesn't support that. So what I'm saying about climate change is we've got a whole lot of noise in the data, a whole lot of noise, and you've heard the phrase, climate's always changing. We had the little ice age, the big ice age, and we have this, then we have that, and we have the Holocene warming period and the medieval, whatever. And it's like, so there's a lot of noise in the data. And what I see as being, corrupted is like, for example, the medieval warming period. I forget. There's a name for that, where temperatures were higher than they are today. In medieval, like they were growing vineyards in London, right?
In Europe, things were warmer than they were a few decades ago.
No, but they're warmer than they are today. Like there were literally,
according to this research that you have looked at as a non-expert.
All right.
Right.
London was a wine producing area because the climate was so favorable for
and you're
growing
qualified
grapes.
you feel qualified.
All I'm saying is that if you look at the modern presentations of, like, for example, the hockey stick guy, right? They just eliminate the medieval warm period.
No, they do not.
They just take it out of the data.
No, they do not.
So we'll try to find that in the hockey stick.
Saying, Charles, hold on here. What I'm saying is that frankly, neither of us is qualified to evaluate this data ourselves.
This is true.
We are forced to rely on experts to evaluate it for us.
But my point is seek out the minority voices, which aren't 100%.
But you only do that. You're only doing that in specific categories. Was my second point. Okay. You are seeking the minority on purpose, which I think is just utterly foolish. But you're doing it selectively, and that indicates obvious bias.
How so? How are you? I mean, because it looks like like toothpaste, but there was no data there. There was no.
You're not seeking out the minority voice about anything else, are you?
Well, what
are your other decisions to make in everyday life? Do you wear a seatbelt?
Yes.
do you? I knew a guy who swore he would never wear a seatbelt because a friend of his was in a car crash and he couldn't unbuckle his seat and he burned to death in it.
Right. I've heard those stories.
Right. So, but you still wear your seatbelt.
Yes.
Did you actively go out and seek out the minority opinion about that? Or did you
Well,
just go with
when
the
I looked
consensus?
into, I mean, the thing is, I could look into any of a number of things, and my understanding is that the number of people who, burned to death because they were trapped in their car by their seatbelts is so low as to be, you've got a better chance of getting hit by lightning. So it's not that the chance of getting trapped by your seatbelt is zero, but it is so low compared to the life-saving qualities of seatbelts
Okay,
in
and that's
cars.
different from climate change. How?
Well, because what I see with climate change is that it's that there is a narrative, and that narrative is getting promoted regardless of the truth. Like, for example, and I don't know if you have heard the phrase that hurricanes are getting frequent and stronger. Tornadoes are
Uh,
getting more frequent and stronger. Like that, those are claims that are repeated
I heard
many, many
something
times.
like
Maybe
that.
they haven't been repeated to you, but they are repeated. They're out there in the culture. Okay.
Okay, are
And
you
when you
are you
examine
willing
them,
are you willing to say that you are exposed to a particular skew of media that may be very different from what I'm exposed to?
I've it is possible, but like, I mean, I don't watch TV. I just you just see things, whether it's on the internet or whatever. But it's like, whenever I see the predictions, the quote unquote climate change predictions, they're usually catastrophic. And like, you want to talk about
Okay.
we were talking about politics earlier. There are certain members of Congress who have stated, like, we have 12 years left, and of course that was a little bit of hyperbole,
That
but
was that was obvious. Let me make sure we're on the same page. That was obvious and inappropriate, in my opinion. Hyperbole. It was a ridiculous thing to say that is not supported by any science.
and she's a self-proclaimed progressive, by the way.
Yes, I know who you're talking about. I know the
Yes.
quote.
That's it. And
Uh,
yes, it was hyperbole, but
I
the
don't
point that I'm trying to
I don't
make
know
is that,
what she was thinking when she said that.
yeah,
But that's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm not talking about the. I will agree. Let's say this. I'm going to agree. Alarmism is not appropriate. Acting like New York is going to be underwater in 10 years or some insanity. You hear things like this.
sure.
Um, no, those are not the predictions, right? When you look at what the scientists actually predict, and I wonder if you've done this, when you go back and you look from the 70s on, what have they actually predicted? What actually came true? And I've discovered they were right. They're completely right on all of it. In the 70s, it was really quite diverse. There was like a certain fraction, it was like 30% of all studies predicted cooling as opposed to warming. But then, science got better, right? In the 90s, when I was in meteorology class, my professor was still saying, well, they're saying warming now, but I think it's the jury's still out because of these reasons. But it's not the 90s anymore, right? That was 30 years ago. Um, we've got the science, right? But it seems like you're saying you're still really, really want to say no, and yet you have to acknowledge you're not an expert in it. I'm not an expert in it,
Right.
but you're not willing to go with the majority in this case.
Well, because I've seen the corruption of the science, the
Okay,
the like
is this the only field of science that is corrupt?
um no, of course not. But I can't think of any. I mean, if you asked me to think about it for a bit, but because the thing about global warming is there are billions of dollars at stake. There's, obviously there's energy companies, there's car companies, there's wind and solar companies. And there's also like what you can do with your own personal lives. Like, for example, there was a period of time there where you literally could not go to the hardware store and buy a 100-watt light bulb, you know? And it's like, that was an example of climate alarmism that got its way into legislation. You could argue about the what is it?
So
Cafe standards, the mileage standards for cars. You know, like lighter cars are inherently less safe. You know, the heavier your car is, the more likely you are to survive a crash.
Is that true?
Yes, that's absolutely.
I would say citation needed, please.
Okay.
However,
But anyway,
Mark has a question here I'd like
sure.
to read. Why would minority opinions not also potentially be corrupted just for different reasons?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, and we could talk about the flat
And
Earth. I mean, like,
I would go further and say that's obvious reasons why the reasons why someone would be motivated to say climate change is not real are patently obvious. Not so much the other way. I can't think of powerful industry influencers who are motivated to say, you know what, this whole fossil fuel thing, better not, right? Right? I can't think of car companies, no. Oil companies, no. Electric companies, no. Who are these powerful people influencing everybody to say, stop doing that?
It's not a conspiracy. That's the thing that you're.
Okay.
I don't want to. I don't want to have it be a cartoon view that it's a conspiracy, but people, human beings, for our lifetime of evolution, fear is a part of our psyche, the fear response, and the whole thing about climate alarmism, or the global warming, which leads to a lot of climate alarmism, is it really is, it's fear based, and so you're familiar with Tony Heller. We've talked about Tony Heller before, and one of the things that he does is he just goes through the archives of like the microfilm of these old newspapers where they're quoting scientists after scientists after scientists about what their predictions are, and the extent of forest fires in the 1930s, et cetera, et cetera. What'd you say?
You don't think he's cherry picking? You think he's doing an honest spectral survey? Well, do you?
Yes, he could be cherry picking, but the point the point that he's making is that the same headlines are being written today. The exact same headline, not exact same, but the same headlines are being written today.
So are you arguing the science, or are you arguing the headlines?
Well, my point is that the science is corrupted, and that everyone reads, well, not everyone nowadays, because people don't read the newspaper, but I mean, and you and I grew up with Earth Day, and we were all taught humans are destroying the planet, and that's in the psyche of generations of school children, who then become adults and don't necessarily join, become atmospheric scientists. So they just hear the stuff that's out there, and the tendency to go towards the fearful side is stronger than the tendency to be less fearful.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just going to keep coming back to this until I get some kind of better explanation from you on why this one particular field of science is, in your opinion, corrupt, whereas apparently other fields of science,
I haven't thought of it.
You're cool with the paradigm of, whatever the scientists come up with. Yeah, I think that's pretty good.
Well, I think the area of gender, that's an area where science is being corrupted.
Hold on. Is there any science anywhere that was discussed in that topic, or is it you're talking policy?
Well, the biology of male and female as being something that is psychologically determined, that could be a scientific question.
Nobody's ever made that claim.
Well, they make that claim all the time. They
No,
make that claim all
no,
the time, which is why
no, they don't.
you can have,
Scientists
you
do
know,
not make the claim that your biology is determined by your mental state.
well, your gender,
Gender
which,
is not biology.
well,
Gender is a
but that's the
social
claim.
expression, right?
What'd you say?
Gender is a social expression,
Well,
not a.
that is also a claim, and people could argue what's the definition of the word gender versus the definition
Well,
of sex.
obviously, there's multiple
But anyway,
definitions,
so I was
right?
just throwing
But
that out as an area of science.
no one is saying that someone choosing or feeling like they should be the other gender will cause their body to change.
Oh yeah, no,
There
yeah,
is no
that's
science.
but that's a cartoon representation of what I was talking about.
No, what you're doing is deliberately, I'm going to call you out on this. You are
All right.
deliberately trying to cross the lines between science and policy.
So, would you say that Scientific American is a scientific magazine or a policy slash governmental magazine?
I'd say it's a magazine.
Yeah, but I mean,
I'd say
but are
it's a
you familiar with
magazine.
Scientific American? I mean, my dad subscribed to it for years until they actually
Uh,
got politicized in the 1980s.
I don't read it. I wouldn't have a position. My understanding of Scientific American is that it's pop sci, that it isn't a scientific journal, but it is
It's
pop sci. Right?
it's a okay. I get you. Like yeah. Have you ever read have you ever held a copy of Scientific American in your hands? Because
Yeah,
it's written like
sure.
it's written like a journal. You know the language and
Is
the
it?
depth.
Is it
the
like
depth.
abstract,
Well, I mean,
abstract citations like that?
but they go very deep. They like the layperson would not feel comfortable opening up Scientific American.
Okay. I
But
I remember it was pop sci, but I
okay,
don't know.
okay. Well, then we can throw that out. But the point that I'm trying to make is that there is a corruption that can take place with certain scientific studies, for example, or topics such as global warming, and now we're talking about girls and versus boys in sport. You could talk about race. That's a huge one now. With critical race theory. So there's various areas where, and when I say corrupt, I mean that the minority opinion is kind of shouted down, and maybe the minority opinion might be the majority opinion, but there's a certain vocal group that is saying, kind of giving the impression that if you disagree, then you're a denier. That's why I hate that word.
I think you're confusing policy and science.
Okay.
I don't think anyone is going to say that, I don't know, there's like that old race stuff about whose brain capacity was bigger and all that nonsense that was done, some hundreds of years ago.
Right.
That's an example of a paradigm shift. We've paradigm shifted past that, and now we realize that was bunk. And no one's arguing otherwise. There's policy going on in this, cultural change going on, independent and orthogonal to what science is. I would like to talk about the science of it and disentangle, to specifically separate the policy from the science, because I think it's pretty clear from what we've been talking about that allowing policy to get into the conversation is biasing very badly our perceptions of the science.
What would you say about the role of, say, the media? I mean, so we have policy, so that's the governmental side. We have the science, that's like the white lab coat side. But then there's what's out there in the popular culture, promoted largely by, the media. And I think that's a huge part of the issue.
I think the media is a big problem in that. I don't have any answers, but I will tell you that the media cannot be trusted to report on science accurately.
I 100% agree with you on that.
They never
100%.
have. And as far as I know,
but
they never will.
Unfortunately, that's where most people get their science from. Once you leave the classroom, that's where most people get their science from, is from reading headlines or seeing, what's promoted on Facebook or whatever. And then so you just said that the media can't be trusted to report on science accurately. It's like that's basically my whole point about the whole global warming thing. Is that I think the media has been promoting one side with
So if you recognize this, you recognize that the media should not be trusted. Who should be trusted? Let me float. How about the IPCC? How about NOAA? How about the National Organization, the Oceanographic, whatever, NOAA, what does that stand for? How about them? We could trust them, right? They're not popular media.
Well, but they're governmental agencies, though.
So now the government can't be trusted.
Well, what I'm saying is that the government is what does the corrupting,
No, wait. So, the government doesn't tell the media what to print.
No, that's not. No. The government doesn't corrupt the media, but the government can corrupt government institutions.
So NOAA is corrupt.
Well, I'm not saying no. See, that's the cartoon position. But you do know that the data from satellites gets run through a filter, right? You can't take the temperature of the Earth. That is literally impossible, because you've got 1 billion temperature readings that you can use, and how do you average those readings? So it's I
think I'll tell you what I do is I go down to the climate department and I find the professor of climatology and I say, hey, how do you do that?
Right.
And I expect a pretty long, in-depth explanation that some of it's going to go over my head. And I'm going to say, well, could you boil down the results for me and point me to a few papers that have done that? How's that sound to you?
Sure. But what if there was a climatologist who said there's a problem with the algorithm that they're using? Then it's
and I'm going to say, well, I'd be surprised if there wasn't a climatologist who was willing to say that. I'm going to have to say, well, what's the current paradigm? What's the ratio? What's the ratio that you'd be comfortable? How about this? What's the ratio of climatologists you'd be comfortable with saying that minority is onto something? 1%, 5%, 10%, 50%? Where would you say, we shouldn't discount this minority?
Yeah, well, let's just start with a number. How about 1%? If 1% of climatologists say that there's a bone that or there's a thread that you can pull on, and let's pull on that thread, then that's the whole thing about the minority report, and it may turn out that one climatologist out of 100 is in fact a crank, right?
Absolutely.
Or it could turn out that there may be something there. There's some there.
Absolutely. And I'm going to agree. The 1%er could be right. Einstein was right. Einstein was an absolute crank in his day, but he turned out to be right.
Right.
Great. Galileo was a crank. You bet. That's how it works. But I think wisdom suggests that there's a lot more wrong cranks than there are right cranks.
Sure. Absolutely.
So if you're not an expert capable of really making the judgment on your own, your best plan is to do a survey across the existing experts and say, you know what, if there's a strong majority one way or the other, 99-1, no, dude, you've got the crank, right? Your chances, of that guy being right.
But you just contradicted yourself. You just contradicted yourself because
I didn't.
Because now you're back to consensus science. So it's the whole point of driving science forward is paying attention to the non-crank minority. Now, again, you don't know if you were just to roll the dice.
The researchers pursue that line. We're not climate researchers.
Right, this is true.
We are involved, though, in policy making. So if you go through history, right, you go through this science history we have to look at, and you say, Galileo was a crank, but he turned out to be right. Aha, does that mean every crank was right?
Of course not. Of course,
No,
that's
the
a
vast
cartoon.
majority of all cranks in history were wrong.
Right.
So if we're just based on our history, if we're going to make our highest chance of success, we should always vote against the cranks.
No.
Yes, that is how
No.
you maximize your chances.
No, because then Galileo gets put to death every single time.
No,
You
I
know?
didn't say put him to death. I did
Well-
not say put him to death. I said vote against, right? I said let the researcher, I specifically said let the researchers pursue that.
Yeah, but the researchers are part of the consensus that is disagreeing with Galileo. That's the
Not
whole
all
point
of
that I'm
them.
trying to make. Is
Not
that,
all
you
of
know,
them.
at the time that Galileo was presenting his quote unquote crank opinions, the consensus was against him. And like, you know, all these revolutions.
So are you proposing that I say there's two options. Either you go with the crank or you go against the crank.
No, those are not two options.
Those are the
No,
two options.
no,
You can't.
absolutely not.
How do you split the difference?
No.
What's your third option? What's
Your
your
third option is to open your eyes and read and study what both parties are having to offer. And
become the expert yourself? Are you suggesting you become the expert
I'm just
yourself?
saying that, you know, the whole point about like the shut up she explained and the, you know, there was another phrase I was using, but is that the people who are going against the modern orthodoxy of man-made global warming are being dismissed as cranks. In fact, they're using the phrase science denialism, right? So if you say,
definitionally, I would argue it's pretty much science denialism, straight up at this point.
yeah, because so what you're saying though is that even though there's a potential that exists that Galileo is the guy saying that, hey, mankind is not changing the climate, but consensus says that mankind is changing the climate. You're like, well, you know what? You know, Galileo is denying the science, you know, and you're just going to throw him out.
At the time, I probably would have called Galileo a crank. Yes.
Okay. So there you go. I'm on the side of Galileo. I'm not totally teasing you, but I hope you see my point.
I do, but I see it as really twisted and just blatantly biased, absolutely biased. You are saying that 1 in 1,000, I'm going to come up winner, so I'm putting my money on that.
But it's not.
That is
but
what
it's
you were
not.
saying.
I'm not. We're not talking about rolling the dice.
We're at Vegas. We're at Vegas, right?
This is
We're
a
going to spin
cartoon.
the wheel.
This is a cartoon.
It's not a cartoon. You have a decision to make.
If
We
my decision,
we support changes to policy based on the best available science that says we'll be better off in 10 years if we make this change, or we do not support that policy. 10 years down the road, we'll find out whether we were better or not. But you're saying, I'm choosing B. That's your choice. You have a choice to make based on policy. Your choice on policy based on science. And I'm saying either the science is right or the science is wrong. There's a chance. What option do you have other than trying to take your best chance?
Yeah, that's a cartoon way of looking at it. And I object strenuously.
That is super not cartoon. Let me object
because it's an either or. It's
cartoon.
like, you know, we're gonna support this policy that, you know, consensus science says this, but somebody else says that, because what you're ignoring are all of the consequences, the actual real world consequences of the policy that you are proposing.
I'm absolutely not ignoring that.
Yes, you are. Absolutely. Because you're just like, you
know. You have to choose to support policy A or support policy B. Can we agree to that? You're going to choose A or B.
All right. So, but
you're in the
then now
booth.
we get into the role of government. Like, what if we had smaller government? Then you wouldn't even have those policies.
You're weaseling.
Okay, so if you forced
Charles,
me to pick,
you're really weaseling here. You really
okay,
don't want to answer this question.
okay,
And
no,
I
but
think
but
that
but you
indicates something.
what you're doing, obviously I'm going to make the obvious choice. If you said policy A makes things good, policy
No,
B makes
that's not
things
what I
bad,
said.
which are you going to pick? I'm going to pick policy A
That is not.
every time.
Don't
But
straw man. Don't
okay,
straw man me now. Come on.
but that's what you're trying to force me
No,
into
that isn't.
agreeing to, like the whole Las Vegas thing with the 1 in 1,000.
Hold on.
Of
Hold
course,
on. Time out. Time out.
sure.
Deep breath. Let's get serious. No cartoons. No straw mans. Okay. You're going to the voting booth. You're going to vote your support for a policy or rejecting a policy. You have to make that choice. Right?
My default choice is to vote against it. That whenever I go to the voting booth, the thing I always choose no. I don't even read them. I just choose no.
You have a strong no bias. So you're coming in with a very strong no bias.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the policy A is based on some scientific predictions, and voting against it is basically saying, you were saying, if I understand correctly, you were saying that I don't think the science behind that policy is strong enough to support the costs that A represents.
Right, because everything has a trade-off.
Okay.
Everything.
Everything has a trade-off, and it does. It absolutely does. And I'm now asking, what would it take for you to say now that no, that is strong enough? Because everything we've heard from you tonight has been that this is an exception. It's an exceptional case. Galileo is the exceptional case.
Yeah,
so it could be another exception.
Okay, so the reason why is because I've seen so much credible evidence that goes against the narrative. So if it were a policy decision, like let's say, there's some sewage treatment plant and they've been back flushing their whatevers and it's putting sewage into the river and like technically according to the law, they're not breaking the law because it says they're allowed to do this every 6 months or whatever. And like, okay, so I mean, like that sounds reasonable, but I would definitely want to hear from somebody in the sewage, the treatment community, like, how important is this backfilling that has to be done every 6 months or whatever. But, there are some certain things they're kind of obvious. But what's not obvious to me is taking like actual factual scientists, people with PhDs, people with 40 years experience working for NOAA, people who co-founded Greenpeace or whatever, environmentalists, who are like, wait a minute, like there's something more here. And then having those people shouted down as being Holocaust deniers, like that's my issue. That's why I have issue with that denialism thing. Is like these people who a bunch of them have PhDs, a bunch of them have years of experience, and they're just being you're all cranks. You're just all cranks. We're not going to listen to you. That's the part I have a problem with. And then the fact that there's so much emphasis to silence these guys, like for example on YouTube, like you can't, like there's certain things you can't put on YouTube because it goes against, like that's why we can't even talk about the thing that couldn't talk about, the thing that started 18 months ago. We can't even talk about it on YouTube. Can't even have a discussion.
Okay. So you're sliding off topic again.
But with regards to climate change, I've seen so much credible stuff, data,
media
scientists, whatever,
credible.
that I am a skeptic. I am a skeptic of man-made global warming. That's how I arrive at that position.
Let's say it honestly. You've seen media you find credible.
It's rare, but it does exist.
Okay, you recognize
most media is not
minority view amongst the experts.
I'm sorry. What'd you say?
You recognize it's the minority view amongst the experts.
That man-made climate change. Is that what you're saying? That the minority view is that there's not enough data to say that man has changed the environment. Is that what you're? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So you're going with the minority view because you've seen some credible evidence. Have you seen credible evidence the other way?
Yes, of course.
So you recognize
my
that there's
view is
credible
agnostic,
evidence
actually.
on both sides.
my view is agnostic. My view is like it's there's not enough data to support the absolute boom claim that man is changing the environment. That's the thing that I am agnostic
And a
about.
consensus view or a majority view is not relevant to you. You don't think that's relevant?
Well, I really don't like the use of consensus in science. And you made the example yourself with Galileo. The consensus was against Galileo. So it's like, let's go with the consensus. Okay, then let's put Galileo to death every single time, you know? So it's like, I'm not really
Galileo
a big fan of
put to death.
Well, no.
Right.
I the point I'm trying to make is that the word consensus I think is very, very problematic in a evolving scientific question. Let's put it that way. Let's say that the question of man-made global warming is an evolving scientific question with 1,000 variables. There's a ton of theories. There's a lot of predictions that have been made in the past. There's predictions that are being made now. There's tons of readings, but it's an evolving situation.
Sure.
And that saying, you know what, let's just going to go with consensus, I think is the worst time to go with a consensus. It's one thing to talk about the shape of the Earth, and it's like, all right, so we send rockets into space. It's like that's the question of geometry is settled.
Hold on now.
But doing that with climate change
let's
is a mistake.
Let's remind you of the line from Rush, right?
Right. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. Right.
So you are making a choice. You are choosing to take no action.
So, but the no action is not, let's be bad stewards.
You are in the full understanding that according to the majority scientific position, your choice to take no action is potentially very bad. It's very unwise. They say this is a very wise move that you are making here to do nothing.
But that's...
And you are recognizing...
But the predictions...
Just say yes, right?
So that relies upon the predictions of catastrophe being accurate. And I don't believe...
Not catastrophe. I didn't say catastrophe. I said very bad.
Yeah.
Right? It's not going to be a good thing in a number of different metrics, right? They say it would be wise if you'd kind of do something about this. And you're saying, nah, I'm going to wait.
All right. But that's kind of an oversimplification, because my position is that it's not just like this one policy, vote yes or vote no. It's a whole constellation of policies. But I mean, it can even relate to, say, development in Africa, whether a power plant is allowed to be built in Africa. Like, there are literally power plants that are not being built in Africa because we want to prevent global warming. And like, that's a very human, there's a very human cost to that. And so my position is essentially it's the skeptical one, but it's the one that says, there are consequences on both sides. So if I end up being wrong, man is changing the planet, then things, sea levels rise more than they would have otherwise, etc. But what's the opposite? The opposite is, well, people are starving in Africa, or people can't get, reliable electricity for the hospitals in Africa, And I mean, there's a whole bunch of them.
And you're equating those. You're acting as if those are equally balanced.
I'm not saying, I'm not equating them. I'm saying one side of the argument does not, it really is not looking at the consequences of say, said policies. Like, if we call it the Green New Deal. Right?
No, I'm talking about the science, right?
Yeah.
I know you have to make a policy choice, but you're making it based on the science. So let's get back to the science. And you're saying you don't support the science.
No,
and
of course not. Of course
and it's
not.
very clear that it's because of that policy connection that you don't support the science.
No. What you're calling the science is the consensus.
Yes, I'm sorry.
And I disagree with
consensus. You don't. Let me rephrase. You're right. I said science. I should have said consensus.
Okay.
You don't support the scientific consensus because it's too tied up in policies you don't like.
Well,
That's what we just heard.
All right. So, because where the rubber meets the road is policy. So I would say philosophically, I still stand by my original position. I just was taking it to the next level to policy. So eliminate policy. I'm just going to take the Galileo position, which is, let's be skeptical about the consensus. You can call me a science denier. I'm skeptical of the consensus because I've seen very, very credible data that supports this position of more noise than signal.
Okay,
the data is very noisy.
Cause cancer.
What'd you say?
Smoking doesn't cause cancer.
No, of course the data is not more. Okay, see, now you're turning me into a cartoon.
I'm trying to see where the line is, right?
No, the data connecting
like very much a cherry picker.
The data connecting smoking and cancer, it's not a correlation of one, meaning like you smoke a cigarette, you die of cancer, right? But the correlation is not zero. Okay, there is a correlation. Now, there are people who have smoked their entire lives who have not gotten cancer. There are people who have grown up in the countryside breathing nothing but fresh air who have died of lung cancer. So you have these anecdotal extremes, but the correlation is not zero.
And that's
so please do not misrepresent my position on smoking and cancer.
That's different from climate change in what way? Are you suggesting there's no correlation between recent years and the weather?
Yes, I'm saying that the correlations that I've seen have been more noise than signal. That's what I've seen.
You've looked in an unbiased way.
Oh, of course, I looked in a biased way.
You looked in the most biased way.
I looked in the most biased way possible. I went straight to Tony Heller, and I don't pay attention to anybody but Tony Heller. But
I think you're being sarcastic, but I
am being sarcastic. But
you're portraying yourself
the fact that the data exists, the fact that there are climatologists who disagree with the modern orthodoxy, I think that should give people pause. I really think the guy who founded the Weather Channel is one of these guys. One of the co-founders of Greenpeace is one of these guys. Loves the environment, and I love the environment. I think we should be better stewards of the environment.
Do you think that's a good? You think you have an unbiased opinion about this?
No, of course I'm biased. Of course I'm biased.
What do you
Everybody
think
is biased.
The bias? What
What'd
do you
you
think
say?
is causing the bias?
Well, my lifetime of world experience, my lifetime of lived experience is what I was trying to say.
Can you be more specific?
That shapes.
What is it about this issue that is triggering this different action, this different approach you're taking to the science than you take to general science?
Because I see a very strong push to silence the minority voice.
So you think? Okay, let me not
just think about the language you used. You used the word science denialism.
Yes.
That comes straight from Holocaust denialism. They never used blank denialism for any other group of people other than people who denied the Holocaust existed.
Okay.
Now, in the last 10 years, they've adopted the word.
Better phrase for it? Because calling it skepticism would only be fair if you were actually open, right? And I don't think that you are.
Well,
I think that you're very
credible
biased,
data, if credible data came through, that said, mankind is doing this, we could, the trend is clear, and you could do that with say pollution,
We're there, dude.
But in terms of like global temperatures, there's more noise than signal.
No, there isn't.
All right.
There isn't, though. There absolutely isn't. You sound very much like someone saying there's no proof the Earth is a globe. It's very odd for me to hear you say these kinds of things, because I've looked, right, and I do find some noise. I find a lot of media that tries to tell me the opposing view, but I also find that for flat Earth. I find plenty of people who say the Earth is flat and I can prove it. But we reject them. They're easy because we can prove it for ourselves, right? We can't, unless we're climate scientists, we're not going to prove for ourselves the temperature trend. But I urge you, why don't you do it right now? Why don't you Google, I'll share the screen and you can Google up an unbiased search term of some kind, like global average temperature trend 100 years. Why don't you type something like that and show us?
But where does that number come from, though? Because,
the experts, the scientists who've done this stuff,
who are in the consensus,
the signal out of the noise.
Right.
But you're right on board, ready to reject those experts.
No. I'm just being skeptical of conclusions, knowing that there is a minority view. That, like, I'm not a climatologist. I don't have, 40 years experience, and I wasn't a PhD in climate science. But I know that person exists and has something to say. And I think it's ridiculous for us to say, you're just a crank, and let's dismiss you.
That person needs to be silenced or something. What I'm saying is that when we make our daily choices, we probably shouldn't put a whole lot of weight on what the minority says in scientific regards. We should hope that the paradigm in the next several decades will settle. As I'm telling you now, it has done. In the 70s, it was very unknown. It's not the 70s anymore. We've got 50 years of research since then. It's settled now. And I don't see how you've managed to not notice that.
Yeah. See, the thing is, settled by whose opinion? Settled
Climate
by whose opinion?
Scientists.
The consensus.
The consensus.
The consensus says it's settled, just like they did with Galileo.
And when I throw at you, 97%, you're going to come back with the rebuttal, right?
Right. Well, no, I mean, and that's a very famous statistic, that 97%. And that was a very specific number you picked because that was very widely. And it's like, have you ever drilled down to where that 97 really?
Yes.
What did you find?
Papers.
No, where that 97 came from? Okay.
Yeah, published papers, peer-reviewed meta-analysis. And it's been done numerous times by different groups, mostly by one main scientist does it, but there's a few others. And they come with 97%. It varies in the next decimal place. It's correct. There's a competing view from the opposing side, which you have to look at both sides.
Right.
Who says, no, it's 90%. It's not 97%.
Right. Well, let's say 90% is the correct value.
Okay.
Are you willing to say that the 3% minority are all cranks?
I think that the minority has the minority view, that they are about 10% likely or less to be correct than the 90%. So if it comes down to a matter of, I have to make a choice now of what happens in the next 20 years.
But that's a policy choice. So now you were telling me to get away from policy, but now you are then circling back and saying, now we have to make a choice. That's a policy question, not a science question.
I have to make a policy choice based on the science. I am going to try to weigh the policies with the understanding that that is the best available science I have. The science is correct. Now it's time to make a policy choice.
All right. Can we have a slight change of topic where, let's say I believe that CO2 causes global warming, right? This is an alternate version of myself, right?
Okay.
So can you give me just off the top of your head, and the percentage increase of CO2, say in the last 20 years in the United States, the percentage of because energy production is up, automobile ownership is up, the population is up, everything is up, and just I'm just throwing this out, but just like anything, 0%, 1%, 2%, 10%, change in
the
CO2
past 20 years?
Over the last 20 years.
I would hesitate to even guess. I'm going to guess 20 years.
And again, this is
I'm
just
going to guess
random.
10%.
Okay. So they've actually decreased.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
And the reason when they
why is that?
researched it is because of fracking. In that the natural gas, the burning of natural gas for energy versus the burning of coal and oil for energy, natural gas produces a lot less CO2 per unit of energy.
Is this per capita or total?
No. The total amount of energy produced by or total amount of CO2 for the United States. All right.
Okay, let's check it. I mean, I wouldn't be that surprised.
Right. But the thing is, fracking didn't exist 20 years ago, And then so one of the things that makes me so skeptical is when I see new technologies coming out that even do things that that the people who say we're man-made CO2 is causing environmental climate change. Well, but then you propose fracking, and then they're like, well, no, we can't do fracking,
Okay.
or you propose nuclear. Nuclear, it's like if you think that CO2, so, and again, this is now a policy question, this is no longer a scientific question, but this is part of what drives my skepticism, is that if you genuinely feel that CO2 is causing the climate of the planet to raise, if you believe that, then you would be in favor of fracking, you'd be in favor of nuclear power, and the fact that so many of the people who espouse the view of climate change are against those two technologies tells me that there's something more going on, and that's why that's part of why I'm a skeptic.
Okay, I'm sharing now because I did Google it. That your statistic is I agree with it. That
but would you also agree that was unexpected? Like I did not expect to see that. Like I mean, you guessed 10% increase, and I would have guessed 10% increase.
I don't know.
I was kind of surprised by that.
I would say I'm not that surprised by it. Things have changed. Things have gotten a lot more efficient over the years. Right. We've worked on that because there's good economic drivers to be more efficient. And of course, renewables is a growing market. So, I'm not super surprised. Where you're going now is you got to make policy choices, and we could have a whole discussion about what the correct policy choice would be. Is it nuclear? Is it, what should we do? And I would agree. That's where we should be talking. We shouldn't be. What I'm saying is what we should not be doing is saying, yeah, but that's probably not even true, right? That's where we should not be wasting our time as policy choosers, right? We're not policy makers, really. We're kind of policy voters, I guess.
Right.
What we should be saying is, all right, the scientists have come back and said, these are the consequences of our various choices. They think and they'll tell us they're not certain. These are their best guesses. I think we ought to say, yeah, okay, based on that, let's talk policy. But I think there's a lot of people out there who want to say, no, don't listen to that. That's been corrupted somehow. And they're not telling you the truth. And I call that science denial. Yes, you're denying the scientific consensus because you don't want to have that policy talk. If you want to have a policy talk, let's talk about the pros and cons of nuclear.
Right.
We don't need to be saying climate change isn't real in order to talk about nuclear reactors and so forth.
Right.
Why does it have to become, no, those scientists aren't right?
Well, the thing is, where's the role of skepticism? Because it seems that you're still calling a skeptic a denier. Because I'm outside the consensus.
For me, there's a distinct difference between skepticism and denial. Yeah. I'll show you skepticism. Skepticism is when you say CO2 emissions are down in the past 20 years. And I say, oh, really? Let's check it. I check it. I share the results. And I say, Charles was right. I concur.
So you were initially skeptical, probably, because if you gave me that statistic, I would have been skeptical as well. Right.
That's
But you can't just
skepticism.
check the temperature of the planet, though. That's the
Yes, I
you can't just
can.
say no. You
Yes, I can.
no, you can't.
Global
No, you
average
can't.
temperature over
Oh yes,
time.
you could Google it. You could Google it all day. But
And
where
I
does
will
that
share
number
it.
come from? That
I'm going to
number
share
comes from
it
a man-made algorithm. You know.
as if the other one didn't.
Yeah.
Wait, hold on now. Are you trying to say that the thing I shared a minute ago did not come from man-made algorithms?
So no, of course it came from an algorithm, but it's one thing to have
So
something
here's
that is
climate.gov. Okay, that's Gov. Here's Berkeley Earth. What else we got? Wikipedia, Berkeley Earth again, EPA, Statista.com, New York Times. We're not going to trust them. Globalchange.gov, NOAA.
and what are
Right.
these numbers? I don't have you full screen.
Oh,
These
okay.
are
I,
global
I
average
haven't
temperature
I
over
haven't
time.
chosen them yet. I'm just
Right,
throwing up the spectrum. What I'm
right,
showing is that the
but
data is available.
right. Do you see that hockey stick graph that's right in the middle of your screen?
This one?
Yeah. How come that looks so much different than all the other ones? You know?
Probably because of the year spectrum.
Where does that
They're,
go
they're
from,
different
like the
years,
year
right? This
zero?
is from 1800, 1860 to 2020.
Yeah.
This one's from year zero to 2000, right? That won't look the same.
Right. But notice that the medieval warm period doesn't even show on that graph. The medieval warm
Oh,
period where
doesn't it?
temperatures
Oh, doesn't it?
it does not
Burned,
show it
dude.
does not show temperatures warmer than they are today.
No, it doesn't.
So the temperatures
The
and
medieval warm
you could go
period is
back.
carefully labeled on the diagram.
Right, it's carefully labeled, but the actual numbers. I mean, like this is an alarmist diagram. Like this diagram right here is designed to scare the bejesus out of people. Okay, but this graph does not reflect the actual temperature record because
Yes, it
in the
does.
medieval warm period, temperatures were warmer than they are today.
It says right on the slide, global average temperatures show that the medieval warm period was not a planet-wide phenomenon, and that the Little Ice Age was not a distinct planet-wide time period, but rather the end of a long temperature decline that preceded recent global warming. And then there's a citation.
Okay.
So asked and answered.
Thank you, Google. But you know, I hope you see my point in all this, and that like and
No, I
these are
really don't. I think you better try again.
well, you made my point for me when you raised Galileo. It wasn't me. And the thing is, I think really what's driving you is the question of policy, not the question of science, because
No,
we
that's
could
the question of science. I
no,
want to
because
talk
we
about the
could
science.
we could be living right now in a period where the folks who are skeptical about man-made global warming are Galileo,
We could be.
right? And
We
then
could be.
so
Did you
in which
ever
case
before
we could say, you know, hey, you're a
pause?
crank,
No, pause for
but
a
it's
second.
like, you know,
I want to finish on that.
sure.
We could be. Did you ever hear me deny that?
No, but you talked about Las Vegas odds. It is
What?
you said
Okay,
it's more
we
likely
could
that we're
be.
not. It is
We
we could be.
could be. What are the
But
chances?
right. Well, I don't know what the numbers are, you know?
What do you feel like the chances are?
50-50?
You feel like it's 50-50 based
Yes.
on what? Where are you coming up with that?
Based on there being so much noise in the data
I'd say
that
the best available data is it's at least 90-10. That's the minimum that anyone can show, right?
well, I don't know. These are numbers that both you and I are making up off the top of our head.
No, because we said we looked at the meta-analysis, right?
Well, I
I
didn't look
think
at a meta-analysis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But like, have
But you
you
could,
taken any interest in
right?
the views of skeptical environmentalists? You know, like
Sure.
there's actually a book, The Skeptical Environmentalist, and then there's another one that's called Cool It. You know, he's like, let's lower the temperature on the global warming debate. You know, like have you looked at any of the,
I
you
haven't
know,
read those books, but I definitely looked at both sides.
yeah,
After you sparked me last time we talked,
okay,
I went and I looked, and what I was struck with more than anything else
okay,
was how much noise there is out there, how easy it would be to just throw your hands up and say, there's no way we could know. I definitely saw that when I looked.
When you say
It's
noise, do you mean
absolutely
noise in the debate, or you mean noise in the
debate.
data?
In the debate, not in the data.
Okay.
In the debate. The experts, as I certify them, right, as I call them experts, are aligned to an incredible degree at this point.
Right. But there's a 3% holdout apparently.
Yeah.
What's up with that 3%?
There's roughly a 3% holdout.
So you're willing to take that 3% and just say that, just throw them under the bus.
You act like that would be a strange choice.
Well, no, because, like, for example, if you were to talk about, geological physicists, whatever, and poll them on the shape of the Earth, you're going to get 100% versus 0%, and so the fact that it's 97 to 3, I think that somebody should be paying attention to what the 3% are saying. Like, is there any merit to their claims? Is there any merit to what that 3% is using as, and apparently they're polling scientists, so these guys are scientists. They're not just some yahoos on the street that they polled. So it's like, I would hope that there would be some desire to really see what these folks have to say, as opposed to just dismissing them as cranks and saying, you know what, we're going to go with 100-0, and we're gonna have our policies based on that.
Let's go 97-3.
So, but you're calling the 3% science deniers. I mean, they're scientists.
No, I'm not calling them science deniers.
But I mean,
let's make that clear. I'm not calling the 3% science deniers. I'm calling the people who say, I'm going with the 3% in the face of the 97% on the basis of my own personal choice that is not backed by science. I'm calling them science deniers.
Well, how is that different from the 3%, though?
Because
the
those
3%
are actual scientists doing
though.
actual science.
Those
3% are actual scientists doing actual research.
And they came up with an opposite conclusion.
Right.
So you just bolstered my claim.
No, I don't think it did.
Actual science, they're actual scientists, and they came up with a conclusion that is the opposite of the majority view. So if I agree with them,
we need to wrap up. But
okay.
I would like to share with you these 5.
Michael Mikowski has a lot of really good comments here.
It's totally wrong, and I think that's why it's in quotes.
Yeah.
There are 2 possibilities, therefore there's a 50-50 chance that either of them is correct. Oh, no, yeah, and then he says no.
Yeah, but that's not where my 50-50 came from, because I'm a skeptic, and as my skepticism says that there might be a chance that man is causing global warming, there might not be, and the data I've seen is so noisy that there is a chance, and I'm just ballparking it as 50-50. But it is not based upon there are 2 choices, therefore I'm attributing 50% to each choice. Just to clarify where my number 50%.
Right. A couple of times you said I made your point. I want to stress that real fast.
Okay.
The points that I made for you were, because I want to completely agree with these points.
Okay.
That once in a while there is a scientist who has a minority view who is correct.
Yes.
The minority view is correct the vast minority of the time.
Yes.
Okay, great. So that's not 50-50. That we just agreed minority.
Yeah, but we're not talking Las Vegas odds, though.
Yes,
now
we
you're
are.
using anecdotes.
Everything is statistical. Science is not absolute.
Yeah, but
science is never absolute.
But you can't just say
science is always statistical.
Yeah. But you can't just say, we're going to talk about some random scientific topic. We're gonna just pick a topic at random, and then we're going to say, okay, there's a minority view and a majority view. Okay, the minority view is actually wrong in most of the cases. Yeah, okay. But we're not talking about some random topic. We're talking about a topic that's been studied for decades and decades, and there are at least 3% of actual physical scientists are taking my position, which is at least let's be skeptical. You know, like that's my position is let's be skeptical. Let's study it further,
okay.
but let's be skeptical.
All right, that's cool.
Okay.
Let me wrap this up by hitting you with the 5 signs of science denial,
Oh, geez.
and you tell me whether yes or no on this particular
Did Bill
topic.
Nye write these?
This is from some author who printed a book recently. This one's from John Cook, whoever that is. Okay, but it's the same 5 that I've seen before. So number 1, conspiracy theories. Is this a conspiracy theory?
Do I believe in conspiracy theories? No.
Yeah. So you don't think that your characterization that the science has been corrupted.
That's not a conspiracy.
Whatever. It's not a conspiracy.
Not a conspiracy.
Not a conspiracy because there's not an organized.
Are you interrogating me on these questions? Or are you going to ask me the questions? My answer to your question is no. I do not believe in conspiracies.
Well, I want to clarify. The reason
I do not believe that corrupting of the science is a conspiracy.
Okay, just that it is corrupt.
Yes.
Okay, but not a conspiracy. Gotcha.
It is not free of corruption.
Okay. Fake experts is the next one. So I would say that's Tony Heller.
Well, you know the potholer 54. You could say potholer 54, who has debated with Tony Heller with a YouTube. One guy makes a video, the other guy makes a response video, blah blah blah.
Right.
And it's like they're both fake experts. I mean, potholer 54, I believe his profession is a journalist. Tony Heller, his profession was a semiconductor debugger. So it's like you can call them both fake experts. But I think it's very interesting.
If I cited potholer as an expert, I would say that's a fake expert.
Yeah. No, but
instead I would say that potholer's whole thing is that he's not an expert.
Right.
He cites experts.
Right.
That's the difference.
Right. So I'm not citing Tony Heller as an expert. I do appreciate his thorough looking at like the data. Like, I mean, his videos are just full of graphs and stuff, going back so many years. And there's so many places where, here's the graph that they show you. And then it's like, well, here's the graph going back 100 years. And it's like the catastrophic or, nature of recent data pales in comparison to historical data. Like he does that stuff all the time.
So would you say you're not using him as an expert?
No, I'm using him as like pop science or pop.
Okay.
He brings things to my attention that I then
cherry picking.
I'm sorry. What's the actual question?
Are you guilty of cherry picking?
Probably, but I do make an effort not to. I mean, I'm well aware of the problem of cherry picking. So I'm probably, because I'm a biased individual. So you can put me down.
Is Tony Heller the guy that you had me investigating last time? The one who said that it was 1930s was the hottest or whatever? Was that Tony Heller or somebody else?
That might have been a Tony Heller. But I mean, obviously he was taking NOAA data,
But
so
I don't know if you recall that what I discovered was that was really badly cherry picked.
Okay.
Like super obvious cherry picking.
Okay.
Right? Okay. Impossible expectations of what research can deliver.
No. No, I would say the global warming side has that. Because they, they're like, the data says this, and we're going to go with we have to make a policy decision today because it could be catastrophe. Therefore, and it's like, I think that's unreasonable. So yeah, I would say my answer is no for me, but I would say that you could argue that.
I think the understanding here is that your expectation is that they would have better data before policy was made. And that's the impossible expectation. I think.
Yeah. But the thing is, since the data is so noisy, then I would say that before we make policies that could be potentially very, very harmful to real people, that we would choose to wait and see, or at least choose to make.
Can you quantify that in any way? Is there any way to judge?
Yeah.
What is an appropriate expectation of that level of noise?
That's a tough one.
Okay. And the last one is misrepresentation and logical fallacies. I don't think that applies really.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a really pleasurable
I would
conversation.
say you're on the spectrum with this.
On the spectrum because of my I have a score of 0.5 out of 5.
No, I'd say you absolutely hit number 4 strong and hard. You are the poster child for number 4, which is impossible expectations.
Really? You think I have
Yeah,
impossible
when you say
expectations?
this, the signal to noise, that's the
Right.
buzzword there.
Right.
Saying, oh, there's no way to know for sure. Right. The
Well, no,
science
I
isn't
never
in
said
yet.
there's no way. I never talked about knowing for sure. I'm just saying, like, my skepticism is driven by the noise. You know, like trying to find the signal in the noise. You know, I mean, like you've seen the thing where there's like, and you could use a random number generator, and then you could turn that random number generator into a line graph where it just is like a bunch of zigzags, right? And then you say, I want to plot a curve, or I want to plot a trend line. And the trend line's upward, you know, like, I mean, it could have been downward. It was a random number generator, but like, that's what I see. I see these zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. And then I see this.
Something like this.
Well, but that the hockey stick graph has been thoroughly discredited.
No, sir, it is not.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
Not anymore. It really, it's funny. It really hasn't been discredited any more than any of the other types of, scientific debates. This has been, actually, there was a recent paper came out this year that supported it and tightened the bars. So,
okay,
it's been supported, and I would advise you to look at the other side.
right.
Don't just look at the skeptic side. Look at both sides.
Yeah, but the fact that it has been like you remember the
So
East
yeah,
Anglia
it's
emails?
noisy. I'm not gonna say it's not
but
noisy.
the corruption though, it's tough to say acknowledge like what's an unbiased source. Of course, there probably may be no unbiased sources, but you remember the whole email gate conspiracy. Not
I
conspiracy,
do, and I even read some of those, and I laughed
Right.
at anyone calling that gate. It was ridiculous.
But
preposterous.
but there was a very definite attempt to get around Freedom of Information Act. Like if you try to get around the Freedom of Information Act by subterfuge or whatever, and it's not just a question of we need the resources to just photocopy this stuff. We were talking about like emailing data sets where it could have been a few keystrokes and they could have emailed the data set, and they were like, how do we get around a FOIA request? Like, you're no longer a scientist,
Okay.
So.
I do need to get going.
Okay.
This is a
It was
fascinating
pleasure.
conversation.
And I do want to say Mark has a lot of really, really good comments. Thank you, Mark. I'm sorry we didn't, respond to your comments live and in the moment.
I put them up once in a while, but yeah, Mark, good stuff. Good stuff on supporting you as well. Definitely on there. Yeah. To sum it up, we have not come up with anything we can agree to.
Right.
In terms of a way to judge good science from bad, or science that we really would be advised to support. It seems like we agreed that there is such a thing as a minority and a majority, but that
Right.
definitely does not. We can agree that it doesn't, with any perfect certainty, tell you the truth.
Right.
Of course. I propose that that's the closest thing we have to a good, like a statistical analysis, if you will, of what should be the truth and what is likely to be true and what is not likely to be true. And you're taking the position that no, we shouldn't go with any sort of statistical view of it. Is that right?
My view is that you can't treat a very specific scientific question as a random scientific question. If it were a random scientific question, then the consensus view is correct 99% of the time. So it's like, I give you that. But
in this
my exception is that where you want to treat global warming or anthropogenic global warming as just a random scientific, and like, let's just say that the minority is wrong. Well, yeah, the minority is wrong most of the time, but like that's not a great reason to reject the minority because of the example of Galileo and all the other scientists who were pioneers and going against the establishment of their day. The fact that the minority
you agree
view,
that they're rare,
yeah, right,
but you don't want to reject them.
right. I think they should be studied. Like that's my whole point. That's the whole point of
Well, I
skepticism.
don't think it is your point. And I don't think it's fair to try and portray it as if that's your point, because you're not coming here saying it's wrong that no one is looking at the other side. You're coming out here saying we should not make policy decisions based on this yet.
Well, yes, that and the word, using the word science denialism to describe the minority in a scientific question.
Okay.
I think that's very offensive. I mean, I'm not easily offended, but like that term literally comes from Holocaust denier.
Okay,
100%.
I agree that the term is
100%.
pretty offensive.
And
Do you have a better word for someone who says best available science, not for me?
No,
what would you say to that? How would you describe
the word
that?
skeptic, global warming skeptic was a perfectly fine term before they came up with this
I'm not willing to
denialism.
give you skeptic unless you show skepticism, right? Saying nuh-uh is not skepticism. You have to be willing
what about the
to look at
3%?
both sides.
The 3%, they're saying nuh-uh, and they're scientists.
No, they don't say nuh-uh. That's not what they say. They publish papers that go into specific details.
Okay, which
They don't
come to
say
the conclusion of nuh-uh.
No, it isn't the conclusion of nuh-uh.
Okay.
It's a conclusion of this study does not support that hypothesis.
Well, the 97% figure was on people, not on studies.
It was on studies.
Well, all right, then we're talking about two different 97% figures.
I think there was another one on people. I think it came out.
Because it was 97% of scientists. Like that's where they kept talking about, the consensus. 97% of scientists agree. And I'm saying, what about the 3% who disagree? Like I'm talking about,
what about
the 3% of people.
Why would you be surprised that there would be 3%?
Well, because it doesn't exist in like something that is truly subtle, like the shape of the Earth. There are 0% of, astronomers or geologists or whatever who think the Earth could be any shape other than a globe.
Would it surprise you if I told you the number of astronomers who believe the Earth is 6,000 years old is not 0?
Yeah. Well, but if you were to take a percent and round to the nearest percent, I would be very surprised.
It would round to 0, but it is not 0.
Oh, of course, because you are going to have cranks, right? That's the point. You are going to have cranks. But when you talk about the 97% figure, 97% of scientists, that 3% figure is not 3 scientists. That may be 3,000 scientists.
So my insistence is that the word skeptic is reserved for somebody who reserves judgment until better evidence is offered, not someone who refuses to accept the evidence when it is offered. Refusal to accept evidence is not skepticism. And I don't think you get to use that word.
But the evidence is so, the evidence is so
I showed you some evidence just now.
Oh,
you didn't want to look at it, right?
Sure. But anyway.
You don't get skepticism unless you're willing to look at the evidence. You need a different word.
Well, I'm willing to look at the evidence, but the East Anglia emails prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the science is corrupted. I mean, and the stuff with Michael Mann, he's the one who created the hockey stick.
Okay, I read those emails as well, and I will not concede that. No.
Yeah.
That absolutely does not do that. When you read out of context sentences, they can be spun any way you want, and I think we know that. Right? That's not the appropriate way to be delving into what is the correct science, is by digging
the phrase
into
"hide the
private
decline."
emails.
That's taken out of context.
The what?
You remember that phrase "hide the decline"? That was one of the famous.
It was very much taken out of context. Yes.
Yeah. So okay.
Very much.
I'll give you that. Hey, this is a real pleasurable conversation. We had a good input from Mark and a number of other people, and a couple bots apparently.
Are there bots?
Weird. Well, there are these weird messages that come up with periods, like that. It's like periods and strange capitalizations, and it's like I don't think that's a real person.
No, I don't think so. Okay, yeah, I do really got to go.
Hey,
sad that we can't come to any kind of consensus. But I think that in itself, one thing we should probably agree on is the fact that we can't come to any kind of agreement on an objective approach is an indicator of obvious bias. Either I am biased or you are biased. I'm not saying who's biased.
I'm saying we're both biased.
But
it's obviously more your fault than mine. So let's
obviously.
Just, yeah. Okay. Hey, it was a real pleasure talking with you.
Okay.
Thank you so very much for the invitation, and then we'll touch base in the near future.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.